Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal Venerable. See playlist for other chapters and novels. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 641, Smelting the Giant Sword. The mummy suddenly opened its eyes, startling everyone. Especially Malcolm, who was standing the closest to Yolanda. He suddenly retreated several steps as though he had been bitten by a venomous snake. He stared at the mummy warily. After all, the mummy used to be a world lord. He had the strength to control the world when he was alive. Now all that was left of him was a corpse, but the moment he opened his eyes, he caused fear in the hearts of the onlookers. Yolanda glanced at Malcolm lightly before saying, "I didn't know how to leave the core area. But I do know now." Everyone stared at the mummy carefully, afraid that it might come back to life. They couldn't imagine the strength of a world lord. Even 1 in 10,000 of his strength might be enough to kill everyone. However, along with fear, one more emotion shone in the eyes of the onlookers, and that was greed, just like it did in Malcolm's eyes. Regardless of the mummy's previous identity, what he offered at this point was a great opportunity for everyone. Even the contents of the Skylark bracelet that Yolanda just took were hard to imagine. Although they all eyed the Skylark bracelet, they still had to be reasonable. Yolanda knew more about the Dark Nether Cave than anyone else, and she said that there was a way to leave this place. Opportunities were important, but survival was more important, so was leaving this place. They had to get out of the fog no matter what. Otherwise, they would die. Zen, on the other hand, had an altogether different concern. He asked Lavender in a low voice, if Yolanda knew her brother died here, why did she wait until now to enter the Dark Nether Cave? He knew that it had been quite a long time since Yolanda had entered the Tower of Sin. If her only goal was to collect her brother's belongings, there was no need to wait until now to enter the Dark Nether Cave. After all, the Dark Nether Cave opened every year. Lavender shrugged her shoulders and said, "I'm not sure." After thinking for a while, she added, "Maybe it's because of you." "Me?" Zen frowned. "It's just a guess, but she has been following you from the beginning of the trip to the Dark Nether Cave. Collecting her brother's belongings might not be her only goal. There is some other reason too," Lavender said. "That guy called Immortal Mist, who gave you the jade butterfly, may also have his own ideas. If you find the inheritance, then you'll have to act according to the circumstances. He may not be a good person." It was purely speculation. From Lavender's point of view, the human race was an extremely large race in the upper world, and they controlled many more worlds than the Demon Knight. Furthermore, the humans didn't get along well with each other. Wars and conflicts were common among them. According to Lavender, it was very likely that what happened in the Dark Nether Cave was an internal conflict within the human race and had nothing to do with any other race. Lavender's only goal was to ensure that Zen would quickly grow up and bring her back to the Demon Knight. Therefore, she didn't want him to become a victim in the human race's internal strife. Zen nodded his head. Although Immortal Mist was just a dying soul, he had his own motives. Zen had to make his own decisions at critical moments. He knew that Lavender was looking out for him. Soon Yolanda put her brother's body into her Sumeru space, which was not like a small world. It couldn't contain living things. If one forcefully put them in, they would be excluded. But if they put a weak living being into the Sumeru space, it would be instantly killed. After collecting the mummy, Yolanda took the bracelet out again. She gently bit her finger and squeezed a drop of blood onto the little golden skylark at the end of the bracelet. The drop of blood was quickly absorbed by the skylark. Everyone's eyes were on the bracelet. Of course, they were aware that Yolanda was refining the bracelet. Malcolm, Rihan, Shane, and their companions were dying to know if the bracelet really did contain a Sumeru space. If so, what kinds of shocking treasures were inside? Any treasure from there would allow these people to reap endless benefits. After Yolanda had refined the bracelet, she gently touched the skylark and retrieved something from it. Everyone's eyes were burning with curiosity. There was indeed something inside. Yolanda was holding something that looked like a crab. There was a long metal chain at the bottom of the crab. The crab looked like a small ornament. Yolanda slowly climbed up from the bottom of the pit and walked toward Zen. What is it? Zen stared at Yolanda. Don't move. Yolanda walked in front of Zen and pulled the metal chain, putting it over his head. She hung the crab on Zen's chest. This is for you, she said without offering any further explanation. Then she sniffed at him, turned around, and continued walking forward. Everyone was at a loss. Yolanda was being so cryptic that nobody was able to understand what was going on. They didn't dare to ask her what she gave Zen. Since she was the only one who knew how to get out of this place, they might as well follow her obediently right now. Yolanda was walking in the front, while Zen and the rest were following behind. Malcolm, however, was at the rear of the group. The road they were on previously had been desolate, but now as they got closer and closer to the red dot in the sky, strange things started to appear. For example, not too far away from the huge pit that they passed, a huge sword was being stabbed into the ground. The sword of the Blood Fiend Emperor that Zen had obtained from the Cloud Road was huge. However, it dwarfed in comparison to the enormous sword in front of them. The giant sword was over 1,000 feet tall, even taller than some mountains. Zen raised his head to look up, but he was unable to see the hilt of the sword as it was shrouded in mist. Even the members of the giants would not be able to wield such a large sword. Who knew what kind of person could use such a huge sword? Esther, Fabian, Malcolm, and the others all took a fancy to the sword. Esther and Fabian originally wanted to use their space rings to store the sword, but soon discovered that it was futile. Even if their Sumeru spaces could hold the sword just wouldn't budge. Malcolm was even more determined than the others. He flew up and stood on top of the hilt of the sword. He held it with both hands hoping to pull out the huge sword from the ground. Ha! Malcolm shouted. Ogres were naturally blessed with great strength. Besides, he had eaten the fruit of the Dark Sky Mage, which increased his cultivation a lot. The forceful energy in his body suddenly erupted. Such a violent force was enough to move even a small hill. But not this sword. It just did not budge. In the end, Malcolm jumped down from the huge sword looking resentful. I can't take this sword away. Malcolm walked to the side with his hands behind his back. Having entered the treasure mountain but leaving empty-handed was indeed depressing. Now Zen walked towards the sword. Humph, you think you can pull out the sword? Malcolm sneered. Zen, the weight of this sword cannot be estimated. Even if your strength differs from an ordinary person's, you still won't be able to pull it out, Fabian reminded him. Zen smiled and said, who said I wanted to pull it out? The moment he said that, Yolanda immediately understood what he wanted to do. Lavender agreed, this sword has no owner. Since we can't take it away, it wouldn't be a bad idea to smelt it. Smelt it? Shane narrowed his eyes and laughed. It's not that simple to smelt this sword. This sword of the upper world has been standing here for countless years. The power contained in this giant sword is far beyond what we can imagine. Even if all of the weapon refiners in the world were invited here, they still wouldn't be able to smelt it, Jared said and shook his head. Zen, however, did not speak. He walked to the side of the giant sword and sat down cross-legged. He had already used his black flame before them, and there was no need for him to conceal it. With a blink of his eye, the black flame in his mind shot out towards the giant sword. The black flame. Esther and Fabian had seen Zen's black flame before, but Malcolm had never seen it. The moment the black flame made contact with the sword, a small hole immediately appeared on its blade. Chapter 642, Rebuild Heavenly Body. It wasn't only Malcolm who was shocked at the scene. Fabian and Esther were equally taken aback. Zen's black flame appeared almost invincible upon exploding. It had even burnt the tongue of the bull-like giant toad. No matter how powerful the bull-like giant toad was, it was still flesh and blood. It was less shocking that the black flame could burn the toad like that. But the sword in front of them was definitely something stronger than a sacred weapon. It could even be a divine weapon. Although no one was sure, they could guess it was a divine weapon. But Zen's black flame had even started to smelt the sword. And that too, in a very brief time. To Esther and the others, it seemed like an unbelievably fast speed, while to Zen, it seemed rather slow. Earlier in time, when any weapon was burnt by the black flame, a gentle flick of the flame was enough to burn all the impurities of the weapon. But this sword was different. It had resisted the black flame for a few seconds before it started to melt down completely. Parallel to that, a lot of heavenly essence started to fly towards Zen like water running in a stream. That is a lot of heavenly essence. Wow, this heavenly essence can be used to refine weapons. Fabian exclaimed. But there wasn't a single weapon refiner present at the scene. The heavenly essence was rare, but it wasn't of much use for any unskilled, normal person. While Zen continued smelting the sword further, a small hole started to appear right at its center, gradually growing bigger and bigger. Finally, it grew as wide as the width of the sword and the bottom half of the sword turned into a burning, viscous liquid. Thereafter, the upper half fell on the ground with a loud bang, piercing it while causing a deep fissure into it. Zen did not even glance at it as he continued to smelt the remains of the sword, his eyes focused on what was now an undulating surface. The amount of heavenly essence produced by this sword was equivalent to that created by millions of fairy weapons combined. It flowed towards Zen in torrents and he collected it without letting any of it go to waste. Zen's increased strength would also have an effect on the power of the dragon scales, making them much more important. If used correctly at critical times, the power of the dragon scales could produce a miraculous effect. Now that Zen had also established the 100 meetings platform in his body and gone through body refinement, his physique had improved impressively. With his new form and the posture that came with it, he could withstand even greater strength. As he smelt the sword with all his force, in his mind he asked the cyan dragon, "What will happen if I light up all the dragon scales?" Until now, he had only lit up a few dragon scales, and he had never imagined lighting all of them at all. He couldn't even have imagined how much heavenly essence it would take to do such a task. But now, he understood that a sacred weapon contained exponentially higher amount of heavenly essence than any fairy weapon. If he continued to smelt more of these, he could get a chance to light up all the dragon scales in the future. The cyan dragon laughed before answering, "If you light up all the dragon scales, then you'd be able to help me rebuild my heavenly body." Heavenly body? The cyan dragon then let out a faint sigh and explained, "When you first lit up the dragon scales, I didn't imagine you growing to this level someday. When my and my 8 brothers' souls were suppressed by this furnace, our bodies were completely destroyed. The heavenly essence comes from the weapon refiners, comprehension of the heavenly law. If you help us rebuild our heavenly bodies, we might be able to come back to lives." The cyan dragon's words seemed to contain a complicated emotion. To rebuild the heavenly body was something that he could not even dare to think about. But after he realized that Zen had the capacity to lead this world of chaos, he knew that it was highly likely that Zen would help him and his brothers to rebuild their heavenly bodies. As Zen continued to grow in strength, the possibility of getting back whatever they'd lost was becoming realer. How could the cyan dragon not be moved to hope? "Thanks a lot, Zen," the cyan dragon said sincerely. Zen's face broke into a smile. "You don't need to thank me. I also need to borrow the power of the dragon scales. Furthermore, I don't even know how long it will take for me to light up all the dragon scales," he said. "Ha ha, I don't think it will take a long time," the cyan dragon said, convinced it wouldn't be long before Zen became a powerful warrior. As long as he didn't die in the process, it wouldn't be difficult for him to obtain heavenly essence in the future. And once that happened, it wouldn't even be too difficult to light the scales of all the other genuine dragons, not just light up the cyan dragons. Just then, a voice sounded in Zen's mind. "Hey Zen, you've already helped him light up so many dragon scales. How about helping me light some now?" This voice was the red dragon's. He was the cyan dragon's 7th elder brother. Zen chuckled in response and replied calmly, "There's no rush. I'll help the cyan dragon light up all the dragon scales before helping you." The red dragon was only joking. If Zen could light up all of the cyan dragon's scales and help rebuild his heavenly body, he would be able to recover to his full strength. Although the cyan dragon was the weakest of the 9 dragons, he was after all a super legendary beast. After all his dragon scales were lit up, he would be able to help Zen a lot. And so, the most important thing right now was to help the cyan dragon light up all the dragon scales and rebuild his heavenly body before helping the other dragons. Under the heat of the black flame, the sword finally came to an end, and all the heavenly essence got stored in Zen's space ring. In the eyes of everyone who was present, this giant sword was already comparable to a divine weapon. It was indeed a bit of a waste for Zen to have smelted it completely. But nobody could take it away anyway, and hence they only watched its destruction helplessly in awe. About an hour later, the task was finally done to the end. Satisfied, Zed stood up and said to Esther and the others, "We can all set off now." Yolanda looked at Zen without saying a word. Everyone continued to walk forward again. Along the way, they could see skeletons and massive holes in the ground, along with numerous potholes all about the path. When they looked at the scarred and ruined ground, they could sense how terrible the battle would have been. Nobody knew how many powerful warriors had died fighting in the battle. The moment Zen and his companions touched the skeletons, they turned to dust, which was ironic as the owners of those skeletons would have been even stronger than the warriors at the Soul Sea realm. Malcolm, Rihan, and Shane kept looking around with their eyes wide open, waiting for opportunities. They were sure to rush up to it if they found something unusual. Since they were in the core area and Yolanda said she could lead them to leave the place, they were keen on finding as many opportunities as possible. However, Malcolm and the others were very disappointed to not come across anything decent. They did manage to find some weapons, but they were all broken and decrepit. The heavenly essence of these weapons had long vanished, leaving nothing behind but a pile of waste metal. In the end, they might as well have been collecting garbage, as they did not find anything substantial. As they continued their search and advanced forward, they started to feel eerily uncomfortable as if something was off in the atmosphere. And then they realized that the dark nether death light was getting stronger and stronger. The red dot in the sky was already the size of a wheel. Even with the multiple layers of fog blocking the red dot, the dark nether death light was able to exert and multiply the pressure on everyone's protective life vitality. Although everyone's life vitality could withstand it, the consumption rate was becoming faster and faster. In a very short period of time, Fabian had already taken out 2 supreme life vitality crystals, crushed them and absorbed the life vitality within to supplement himself. Malcolm and Rihan were even more troubled. They were body refiners, and relied on the protection of the forceful energy, which couldn't be replenished with life vitality crystals. It could only be generated by their own bodies slowly. It was all right in the beginning as the pressure of the dark nether death light wasn't too great and the consumption of forceful energy was minimal in its comparison. Malcolm and Rihan could withstand the dark nether death light with their powerful bodies alone, and did not need the protection of their forceful energy. But as they got closer and closer to the red dot, the dark nether death light became more intense, leaving them no choice but to use their forceful energy to protect themselves. They were not worried at the beginning. After all, the speed at which the forceful energy was generated within their bodies was faster than the speed at which the forceful energy was consumed. But it was now becoming very troublesome for them to maintain a balance between the two. They were unable to replenish the forceful energy in time, and were slowly running out of it. Once the entirety of their forceful energy was used up, their bodies would directly be facing the increasingly intense and deadly dark nether death light with no protection. That was almost like standing naked in a world full of flames, or a world full of ice. How could they possibly resist and get away alive with something like that? Chapter 643. The wrong move. Malcolm and Rihan were in a tight fix. The condition at hand was now beyond their command. They weren't imbeciles to fail to discover this for themselves. Stop, Malcolm shouted in incredulity. His face portrayed coldness. Zen glanced at him and asked, "What is it?" "We are stuck. This is the furthest we can move," Malcolm replied. The obstacle had outpowered them. Cultivating forceful energy was the fundamental reason they had this substantial burden on their shoulder. However, they were not the particular ones encountering this dilemma. Fabian and Esther could reaffirm their life vitality with life vitality crystals. They cultivated their life vitality instead of their bodies. But now, both the life vitality consumption and their life vitality crystal consumption were accelerating at a lightning speed. "Yes, Zen, if we continue marching ahead, we will have slim chances of combating the dark nether death light," Fabian said in a distressed tone. Suddenly, Lavender sneered, "Didn't you already know? You will be dragged closer to the red dot in this fog whether you move or not." The closer they drew to the red dot, the mightier the dark nether death light became. The logic of this caused their hearts to sink with dread. How would they withdraw themselves and be spared from this condition? Getting close to the core was a tremendous blunder because they wouldn't have the restraint from the fog. Withstanding the dark nether death light would be an arduous ordeal. At the same moment, everyone peered at Yolanda. "Put your life vitality into that stuff surrounding your neck," she said to Zen. Yolanda had attached this crab-shaped substance around Zen's neck in no time. As she did that, everyone present had been curious. Now that she mentioned the item, they all gazed at it. "What is that for? It looks like a precious gem. Can it protect us?" Zen did what he was told without a question. Yolanda's voice expressed affirmation of being competent to guide everyone out of this fog. If that was the case, resisting dark nether death light wouldn't be a hard nut to crack. Zen lifted his hand and infused an upsurge of life vitality into the crab in front of his chest. Zing, zing, zing. An orange glimmer of light radiated from the crab. It covered a section of 200 feet, spreading quickly in all directions. Everyone was submerged when the light was emitted. Dark nether death light had dwindled, and its pressure had slackened. Malcolm and the others felt the hasty development. It's amazing. It can block dark nether death light. It seems that Yolanda really has a plan. But why would she give that item to Zen? Yolanda's method worked, giving the crowd a lot of confidence. She really did have a way to deal with the trouble in the core region, so it was a lot more likely she would be able to lead everyone out. Malcolm flashed his eyesight as he approached Zen. What are you seeking to do? Esther, Fabian, and Jared in unison stood in front of Zen. Peace between the two sides was short-lived. This meant that each side was on toes awaiting for something to crop up. I'm just trying to get closer to Zen, Malcolm said, frowning. Why? Lavender scoffed. She was able to see through Malcolm's intentions with a single glance. The two sides weren't allies as they drew towards the red dot. The intensity of dark nether death light became enormous. Malcolm, Rihan and the three night group members would be instantly eradicated by dark nether death light if Zen decided to ditch them. Malcolm would not let himself be put into such a difficult situation. If walking in the fog became impossible, he would drag Zen and die with him. If he would get through the fog, then he would challenge Zen in a battle. Life or death, their martial arts skills would be the determiner. No reason. If this decision bothers you, then I will make my move now. The black aura on Malcolm's body shimmered, and the pair of black wings on his back flapped once again. After maintaining the peace for only a few hours, they once again began to clash each other. Carrying out a move here isn't an ideal idea, Zen told Malcolm as he chuckled sarcastically. I know, Malcolm nodded. But I'm afraid before long I won't even have the right to fight anymore. Unless you agree to my conditions. What Malcolm said is right. If Zen withdraws this light barrier as we approach dark nether death light, we will all die, Shane echoed. The other two top-level warlords of Night Group and Rihan nodded their heads in agreement. Then what solution do you have in mind? Zen asked. It's very simple. Just stick with us. Malcolm burst out in hilarity as he stared at Zen. They would be safer when they held Zen as a hostage. And if I don't agree? Zen repeated his query. That would be troublesome. This suggests that we take an audacious move instantly. Malcolm said as he shook his head. Zen, stay by my side. Yolanda said calmly after walking up to Zen. She then pointed at Esther and Fabian as she declared to them, as for you two, stay with them. Zen and Yolanda lead us and the rest join hands and follow in unison. If Zen gets away, we'll be in immense crisis. With Fabian and Esther staying with us, it means by then, not only my companions and I will crumble, but Fabian and Esther won't be able to escape the fate of being assassinated by dark nether death light either. This isn't an awful deal after all, Malcolm thought. He felt the urge to haggle. Before he could do that, Yolanda cut him short. If you refuse, don't bother to come along. Yolanda's threat worked. On second thought, Malcolm found that her idea might not be bad. Their safety would be guaranteed, meaning they would be protected to a particular degree. When they had all come into a concession, Shane's countenance instantly altered. He gazed at something, his eyes narrowed. He whirled his protective life vitality and then darted out of the orange-colored barrier. His protective life vitality had the ability to resist dark nether deathlight for now. The others couldn't hold their horses. Everyone was so curious about what had intrigued Shane. Something must have fascinated him. Was there a probability that he had discovered some kind of lucky charm? Everyone brushed off the theory. Shane had a particular norm of picking up unnecessary stuff along the way. Maybe he had likewise discovered some broken stuff and decided to pick it up too, so everyone let the activity slide. Shane dashed off to a hillside. On it there was this extraordinary plant with only 2 leaves. The 2 emerald green leaves exuded a dark green luster. The others spotted the plant too. No matter what this guy has discovered, eventually I will have it, Malcolm thought, a sneer creeping over his face. Excitement could be read in Esther's and Fabian's faces. That plant was clearly extraordinary. But just at this moment, the expression on Yolanda's puppet-like face changed drastically as she sprinted to urge Zen, leave. Speed up. What? Zen was not offered a space to assert more sound. She dragged him as he hastened. The orange light barrier moved quickly with Zen. Everyone looked at Yolanda, who usually was calm. Her pale face shocked them. After all, this was a dangerous place. They all started to flee. In an instant, they all ran into the light barrier and kept on running. Shane marched onto the plant, but something weird happened just before he spread his hand out to dig it out. The plant suddenly grew taller and a small bud quickly surfaced in the middle of the two leaves. The bud blossomed. The mysterious part was that in bloom was an incomparably strange face instead of a flower. The odd face rumbled as a lion at Shane. Everyone glanced as Shane's protective life vitality instantly dissipated. Afterwards his skin instantly disappeared, revealing the fresh red flesh, and very soon, the flesh also proceeded to disintegrate, exposing his white bones. After all this, the bones were not spared. They disappeared into thin air. The only item that was spared was a few fragments of clothing that hovered in the air before dropping on the ground. What for goodness sake could this be? Malcolm exclaimed, dumbstruck. Shane's wretched state freaked the misery out of him. Fabian shook his head. Who knows? Here anything is achievable, so be ready to face the impossible. He said. But that thing has no hands or feet. It won't be chasing us, right? Jared asked. Yolanda didn't answer. Instead, she continued running in front along with Zen. As soon as Jared finished speaking, a touch of green appeared in front of the crowd. Everyone glanced over and saw that the green leaves were exactly the same as the ones they had seen earlier. Clearly the plant had just emerged from under the ground. Everyone finally understood why Yolanda had asked Zen to run. The plant indeed had no hands or legs, but it was able to travel underground. Chapter 644, Watchdog of Torture. As the group of cultivators tried to flee, the plant grew rapidly and formed a flower bud that bloomed right in front of their eyes. Die! Malcolm waved his fist in the direction of the strange plant. Malcolm's surging fist aura enveloped the plant with billowing smoke, creating a muffled sound. But when the smoke dissipated, he was astonished to see that the plant was completely unharmed. The flower bud continued blooming. Soon, the face of a ghost would form on it. Hurry up, let's fly higher, Fabian urged. Zen was fully alert. When he heard Fabian's words, he instantly lifted his body and flew upward. The orange light barrier around the treasure hanging on his chest turned into a circular protection barrier that enveloped everyone within. Unfortunately, as they flew up to the sky, the green plant also started to grow upward at the same speed that they were flying. Be quick, don't stop, Jared roared. Everyone moved as fast as they could. By the time the flower bud fully bloomed and revealed the sinister face inside it, they were quite a distance away from it. All of a sudden, they heard a terrifying scream coming from behind them. Fear gripped their hearts. It's not over yet, look at the ground, a top-level warlord of the night group said with a fearful expression as he pointed below. Everyone looked down and saw many green dots appearing on the ground below them. It was obvious that each of these green dots was a sinister plant. In fact, there was only one plant, but its huge body was buried deep underground. At this moment, its roots were spreading upward and approaching them quickly. It seems that we can only speed up and try to get away from it. Move at your full speed. Follow me, Zen said. As he finished his words, the forceful energy within his body erupted, leaving a thin line of smoke as he rapidly flew through the layers of fog. His speed had suddenly increased by 30%. When the others saw Zen speed up, they tried to keep up with him in order to stay inside his light barrier. Fabian and Jared exchanged a glance before they merged their life vitality together. The two formed a gray shadow and managed to keep up with Zen's speed. Yolanda didn't have to use any secret techniques. She maintained the same speed as Zen and followed closely beside him no matter how fast he moved. Malcolm, on the other hand, grabbed hold of Rihan and tried to carry his companion forward. The pair of black wings on his back continued to flap as he followed closely behind Zen. Anyway, he knew that he would definitely die here if he failed to catch up with Zen. Esther also used her full strength to move fast. There was a faint white light flashing within her and the other two top-level warlords of the Demon Knight as they closely followed behind Malcolm and the rest. The two members of the Knight group, however, were in a miserable state. They were good at stealth and concealment, but they weren't really suited for such high-speed movement. They had been able to keep up with the others in the beginning, but once everyone had started to move at their full speed, these two poor guys found themselves left out of the light barrier's defense. Wait for us, help. The two top-level warlords from the Knight group wailed miserably from behind. However, no one could afford to care about them at this moment. Moreover, the danger they were facing now had been caused by Shane from the Knight group. Even if these two men managed to escape from this danger, Malcolm would personally kill them afterward in revenge. Failing to move any faster, the two top-level warlords were soon surrounded by the green plants. Moments later, the others heard mournful screams coming from behind them. Although they didn't turn their heads back, they could imagine what was happening to the two warlords. Anyway, the others hadn't completely escaped from the crisis yet. The speed at which the plant was traveling underground was astonishing. Although they were all moving forward at such high speed, many small green dots kept emerging on the ground below them. They continued fleeing for another 5 minutes. By then, Fabian and the others had already consumed several life vitality crystals. Even Zen had used 2 life vitality crystals to replenish his life vitality. Finally, they couldn't see any more green dots on the ground. It seemed that they had managed to get away from the huge plant underground. Everyone let out a sigh of relief. They were glad that they had managed to escape the hunt of one of the monsters in the core area. They were all feeling extremely exhausted now. Only Lavender, who was carrying her spear in a leisurely manner, had a relaxed expression. She had the body of a sword spirit which was almost weightless, and Zen was the one who had carried her all the way. Let's take a rest," Fabian said, crumpling down to the ground as soon as they all landed. Esther, on the other hand, stood ramrod straight on, full alert. Staring straight ahead, she said, "I'm afraid there's no time for us to rest." Everyone followed her eyes and found that the red dot was in front of them. In fact, at this moment, it could no longer be described as a red dot. What was in front of them was actually a sleeping gigantic beast. It was difficult to describe the size of this gigantic beast. Several miles away from them was a huge crater. For this gigantic beast, it was a large crater, but for humans, ogres, and demon knight members, it was a bottomless abyss. The beast's skin was completely dark and only its head protruded out of the abyss. However, its head alone was already the size of 10 mountains. 2 huge fangs stretched out from its mouth. The fangs were also the length of a mountain. As for the so-called red dot, it was actually a huge red circle above the beast's head. What's this monster? Is this a super legendary beast? I've never seen such a huge thing before. It's hard to believe that such a colossal beast is sleeping under our sea god continent. If it wakes up, won't it overturn the entire sea god continent? Everyone lowered their voices as they commented. Hearing their cautious way of speaking, Lavender suddenly giggled loudly. "What are you guys afraid of?" "Shish, shish." Fabian, Esther, and the others immediately put their finger to their lips, indicating for Lavender to be quiet. Lavender smiled faintly. If that beast could be awakened so easily, the sea god continent would have disappeared a long time ago. Yolanda nodded. "Yes, it's not that easy to wake it up." "What is this?" Malcolm asked with a puzzled expression. In the beginning, his goal had only been to kill Zen at this place. However, with all these new developments, he couldn't understand what was happening, let alone control anything. When had such a thing appeared under the sea god continent? A creature as powerful as this shouldn't even exist in this world. If this beast woke up one day, even the 2 sacred places of the ogres would be nothing more than a joke. Yolanda pulled at Zen's clothes. "Let's continue forward." As they approached the gigantic beast, they noticed that the fog was gradually becoming thinner while the dark nether death light from the red circle above the beast's head was becoming stronger. The power of the dark nether death light had already reached its peak at this distance. If any of them walked out of the range of the orange light barrier, there was no doubt that they would be killed instantly by the dark nether death light. To make sure that they remained within the orange light barrier, they had to move at the same pace as Zen. The space around the orange light barrier was completely filled with the red-colored dark nether death light. They all stayed close to Zen for security, even Malcolm. "Yolanda, what exactly is this beast? Is it a legendary beast? Or a super legendary beast?" Esther asked out of curiosity. This unexpected exploration had caused Esther, Fabian, and Malcolm to feel a great sense of crisis. "It is neither a legendary beast nor a super legendary beast. It's a fierce beast that is called the Mad Scorpion. It's actually the watchdog of torture," Yolanda replied flatly. "The watchdog of torture?" Everyone gasped in astonishment. They'd only heard of torture in ancient texts and legends. Nobody knew whether hell really existed or not. That was why they were all shocked by Yolanda's words. Esther took a deep breath and then asked, "Does hell really exist?" Yolanda continued to walk forward as she shook her head and replied ambiguously, "Hell may exist." "What do you mean?" Esther asked. She knew that Yolanda might be unwilling to answer her question, but she had no way of forcing her to answer it. Anyway, this answer at least sounded better than the words, "I won't tell you." "Where are we going now?" Zen asked after a moment of silence, staring at the gigantic beast. "Forward," Yolanda said indifferently. "But what else could be ahead other than this beast?" Zen asked. Was she leading them into the abyss? Or were they about to enter this gigantic beast's mouth? To his astonishment, Yolanda said, "Your jade butterfly will give you the answer." Zen immediately took several steps back, his whole body on high alert. "How do you know that I have a jade butterfly?" The corner of Lavender's lips curled up as if she had already expected this to happen. Her eyes were filled with mockery as she stared at Yolanda. Chapter 645, An Outsider. Yolanda rolled her eyes and weighed her possible replies. The gray pupils in her watery eyes moved rapidly, making it seem like there were two snowflakes embedded inside her eyes. "Yes, of course I know," she finally said. "So you also know why I'm here?" Zen asked. Yolanda nodded. "Yes, I'm very clear about why you're here. But you're just an outsider who doesn't know the truth." "An outsider?" Zen frowned slightly. "Mist's luck is not bad. I didn't think that he would be willing to stay in the celestial tomb for so many years and sacrifice the chance of reincarnation. He was lucky that there finally came a person with the fate to lead the great world of chaos," Yolanda said seriously. "But he didn't tell you the whole story." "What is the whole story?" It was true that Zen knew little about this whole matter. He didn't even know what the inheritance that he was pursuing exactly was. "You have your own path, so I don't recommend you getting involved in this game," Yolanda said. "What is the game?" Zen asked. Judging from Yolanda's tone, it seemed that he had been involved in a big dispute from the time he had left the central region and gone into the Sea God continent. Now, it seemed that Lavender's guess had been right. This dispute was most likely a dispute within the human race as well as a dispute in the upper world. It seemed that Mist and Yolanda were not on the same side after all. Zen had no idea what was going on. Yolanda sighed. "It's a dead end." Zen's face darkened. "Can you explain it clearly?" "It's hard to explain." Yolanda shook her head and took 2 steps towards Zen. Then, she took a deep breath before turning her lips up into a smile. It was a rare sight to see. "But since you've already come to this stage, you'll also have a part to play. I just hope that you'll make the right judgment after getting the inheritance and have a clear mind about the path you want to take." "Of course I know which path I want to take," Zen said seriously. No matter what the game was or what kind of dispute they were in, Zen would always stick to his own path and would not be easily influenced by others. No matter how the immortal Mr. Yolanda wanted to take advantage of him, he would always make sure that they didn't hinder his path. He didn't care about whether they were on the righteous side or not. It had nothing to do with him. "Yes," Yolanda nodded. "The road for those who have the fate to lead a world of chaos will always be their own path. Changing your path will be as difficult as changing the trajectory of the stars. Perhaps entering the dark nether cave is a step in your path and I've unknowingly become your guide." What Yolanda had just said was so mysterious that it confused not just Zen, but everyone else as well. As Zen and Yolanda spoke, they were approaching the enormous abyss. The abyss and the beast hadn't seemed far away at first. But even though they'd been traveling for a long time, it seemed that they had gotten only a little closer. The huge beast that was lying on the side of the abyss was gradually getting bigger and bigger. But from here, it was impossible to tell exactly how big the beast was. After flying close to the ground for 4 hours, they finally arrived at the edge of the abyss. Everyone suddenly felt insignificant compared to the huge abyss that lay before them. To be precise, what lay before them was more of a gap in the earth than an abyss. Even if a piece of land as large as a country was used to fill the gap, it would hardly suffice. On the other side of the abyss lay the giant beast. There were numerous spikes on its huge body, which extended from the edge of the abyss all the way to the bottomless pit beneath. They didn't have any idea how big the beast was as the abyss was too deep and they couldn't see where the beast ended. Although Yolanda had said that this vicious beast was called Mad Scorpion and that it was the watchdog of torture, it didn't look anything like a dog to Zen. In his eyes, it was more like a dragon or a snake. "Does this enormous abyss lead to perdition?" A trace of fear appeared in Malcolm's eyes. Ever since becoming a war sage, he'd had a good plan for his future. He knew that since he was a war sage now, he would never be able to leave the Tower of Sin again. Outside the Tower of Sin was the cursed land, and at his current cultivation level, he would surely die as soon as he stepped on it. Moreover, it was impossible to build a transmission array in the Tower of Sin. In other words, Malcolm would never be able to leave the Tower of Sin and the Dark Nether Cave for the rest of his life. However, he'd never thought of it as a problem. As long as he could stay in the Tower of Sin, he could continuously improve his strength and make breakthroughs. Making a breakthrough to become a war sage definitely wasn't the last of it. He could still reach the Soul Sea realm and higher levels than that. Once he became stronger, he would be able to acquire all the fortune in the dark nether cave. After that, it wouldn't be too difficult for him to leave the cursed land. This had been his plan after becoming a war sage. But now, as the brutal truth stared him in the eye, he realized that he had underestimated the dark nether cave. Forget about the Soul Sea realm. Even if he was 100 times stronger than a Soul Sea realm warrior, it would still be difficult for him to survive in the core area, let alone take the fortune inside. Yolanda shook her head and said coldly, "People think that hell is the place where ghosts live. The so-called hell is actually just a door." "A door? Then this is?" Malcolm started to ask again. But before he could finish, Yolanda interrupted him. "If you want to know where this abyss leads to, you can try jumping in." Malcolm glared at her with his fist-sized eyes. They were all enveloped by the dark nether death light. It was bad enough that if he left Zen's orange shield, he would die immediately under the dark nether death light. Now, Yolanda was suggesting for him to jump into the abyss. What a joke. "What should we do now?" Zen asked. "Take out the jade butterfly," Yolanda ordered. Zen reached into his space ring and took out the jade butterfly. The flame that burst forth from the jade butterfly startled everyone. They subconsciously moved to the side to avoid being burned by the flame. However, the flame didn't hurt Zen. The jade butterfly in his hand was like a little spirit that danced in the air. A shower of sparks flew out from it, emitting dazzling light. "And then?" Zen asked as he held the jade butterfly. "Throw it down," Yolanda said calmly. Zen paused, looking hesitant. The jade butterfly had been handed to him by the Immortal Mist and it carried the great mission of getting the inheritance in the dark nether cave. What would happen if he threw the jade butterfly down just like that? Seeing Zen's hesitant expression, Yolanda blinked her eyes and said calmly, "Do you know why Mist didn't explain anything to you?" Why? Zen was also curious about this. Back then, when the Immortal Mist had handed Zen the jade butterfly, the only thing he had said to Zen was that Zen would have to go down the Tower of Sin and obtain some important inheritance. After that, he'd sent Zen to the Sea God continent without saying anything else. How to obtain the inheritance, how to enter the core area, how to use the jade butterfly, he hadn't explained any of these things. Although Zen was a great talent with a powerful destiny, it was impossible for him to figure out how to use the jade butterfly all by himself. Yolanda smiled and turned to Malcolm. "There was once a top-level warlord named Huey in your ogre race, right?" Hearing this name, Malcolm and Rihan nodded at the same time. Although Huey wasn't very powerful in terms of cultivation level, he was famous within the Flaming Ogre Sacred Place and the Dread Ogre Sacred Place. In fact, Malcolm and Rihan weren't the only ones who knew him. Fabian, Jared, and Esther had all heard of Huey before. This was because this top-level warlord called Huey had controlled the Tower of Sin for over 100 years. Generally speaking, the top-level warlords in the Tower of Sin would do their best to suppress their cultivation. When they accumulated enough lucky light, they would leave the Tower of Sin to break through. It proved to be a very effective way for warriors to bypass the bottleneck in their cultivation. Therefore, the top-level warlords who walked out of the Tower of Sin would have no problem making a breakthrough to become war sages. However, suppressing cultivation was not an easy thing. After suppressing it for a long time, it was also possible for one to break through automatically. Therefore, when many top-level warlords felt that they were about to break through, they would leave the Tower of Sin and the Cursed Land. If they accidentally broke through and became war sages inside the Tower of Sin, it was equivalent to courting death. However, there had once been a freak in the ogre race, and that was none other than Huey. Huey had kept his cultivation level at the top-level warlord for over 100 years. During that time, he had been the strongest seat holder in the Tower of Sin. The ogre race had been able to control the Tower of Sin for a long time, and more than half the credit for that went to Huey. As for how Huey had managed to suppress his cultivation and remain as a top-level warlord for over 100 years, it was a huge mystery to all living creatures. Huey had been so strong back then that he could be considered the actual controller of the Tower of Sin. Therefore, even the Flaming Ogre Sacred Place and the Dread Ogre Sacred Place had to pay respect to him despite the fact that he was only a top-level warlord. Chapter 646, Heavenly Immortal Root. Because of Huey's existence, the other races hadn't even had the slightest chance of winning a seat in the Tower of Sin. Although the members of the Demon Knight were born strong, the ogres had still been able to suppress them until Amber appeared. However, the true decline of the ogres in the Tower of Sin was because of Huey's sudden disappearance. No one knew if Huey was alive or dead. He had mysteriously disappeared from the Tower of Sin without a trace. No one knew where he had gone. In the beginning, the ogres had still been able to control the seats in the Tower of Sin. But after the sudden rise of the Demon Knight decades ago, the ogres had lost the first seat to them. Since then, Esther had controlled the number 1 seat while Maurice could only control number 2. Huey's disappearance was a great loss to us ogres. Malcolm was upset. If Huey hadn't gone missing, the Demon Knight wouldn't have been able to suppress the ogres. Don't you think it's strange that Huey went missing just like that? Yolanda asked. Strange. Of course it's strange, Malcolm said with a frown. Then, as he stared at Yolanda, he suddenly remembered something. It's you. You killed him. Yolanda nodded and turned around to look at the unimaginably large monster in the distance. I was the one who killed Huey and turned him into nourishment for the Tower of Sin. His corpse was completely absorbed by the tower. What? Rihan was dumbfounded. The reason for Huey's disappearance struck Malcolm after he recalled that Yolanda had appeared out of nowhere around the same time that Huey had disappeared. Malcolm had never linked those two events until now. The talent Yolanda had displayed when she entered the first floor of the Tower of Sin had been extremely terrifying. As a result, the ogres would try their best to get her killed. However, just like Amber, Yolanda's strength had far exceeded the expectations of the ogres. No matter how hard they tried to kill her, she was always able to defeat her opponents. As a result, Yolanda had easily entered the 10th floor of the Tower of Sin. Just when the ogres were preparing to get rid of Yolanda with everything they had, she announced that she wasn't going to enter the talent tablet. Moreover, she didn't seem to have any intention of going to the 11th floor. Since then, she had stayed on the 10th floor, much to the surprise of the humans as well as the other races. After the initial surprise wore off, the ogres continued to observe her for a while, but she didn't stir up any trouble. And they thought that as long as she didn't reach the top floor, she wouldn't pose a threat to them. So although they didn't understand her reasons, they just let her be. None of the ogres could have imagined that this level 10 war general would have been able to kill the top-level warlord of the ogres without anyone knowing. Huey had been in control of the Tower of Sin for over 100 years. Why did you kill Huey? Although Malcolm didn't know Huey personally and had nothing to do with him, they were still from the same race, so he was curious. Huey was one of Immortal Mist's puppets. He was in the Tower of Sin waiting for Zen, Yolanda explained. It wasn't until now that Zen finally understood everything. Immortal Mist, who was in the central region, didn't know that Huey was already dead. In his eyes, as long as Zen entered the Tower of Sin, Huey would definitely find him at the first possible moment and bring him into the dark nether cave to fulfill Immortal Mist's last wish. As such, Immortal Mist hadn't said much to Zen, only telling him that he would understand everything after entering the Tower of Sin. If Huey had still been alive, then Zen would have been able to reach the top floor of the Tower of Sin effortlessly. At the very least, he wouldn't have been suppressed and attacked by the ogres along the way because protecting Zen had been Huey's mission. However, since Yolanda had entered the Tower of Sin and killed Huey, she was the only one who could guide Zen now. Yolanda blinked and shifted her gaze to Zen's face. If Huey had brought you here, he would have told you the same thing. Throw the jade butterfly into the chasm, because that is the only way to open the passageway. I see. Zen nodded. He didn't know if Yolanda was telling the truth or not, and he couldn't tell which power Yolanda represented and which power Huey represented. But regardless of who was in the right and who was in the wrong, Zen would always follow his own path. He wouldn't easily take anyone's side. With that thought, Zen released the burning jade butterfly in his hand, letting it fall freely down the chasm. Bang! The sparkling jade butterfly collided with the edge of the chasm, sinking into the darkness faster than Zen had expected. All he could see was a small red dot before it completely disappeared into the darkness. What's going to happen? Zen asked. Just wait, Yolanda said. For how long? Zen asked again. Yolanda shook her head. There is no end to this chasm, so I don't know where it is. There's no end to the chasm? Zen asked curiously. No matter how deep the chasm is, it should have an end, right? No matter how deep something was, there should be a limit. 1,000 miles, 10,000 miles, it was impossible for it to not have a bottom. Lavender, who had been quiet all this time, smiled. If my guess is right, this is an endless chasm. There really is no bottom. Someone once explored this chasm in an attempt to find out where it led to and how deep it was. After falling into the chasm for 400 years, he still didn't reach the bottom. It took him 2,000 years to fly back up. Yolanda nodded. Indeed, and there is more than one chasm like this in the worlds. Everyone but Yolanda was shocked at Lavender's words. A guy had jumped into the chasm and hadn't reached its bottom after 400 years. How had this chasm come about? Everyone silently looked at the chasm in front of them. As they stared into the darkness, they began to feel a sense of fear. There were too many secrets in this world, some of them far beyond their understanding. However, there were also enough madmen in this world. Someone had actually been willing to spend more than 3,000 years exploring the depth of this chasm. After Zen threw the jade butterfly down, a full 6 hours passed before they heard a loud sound from the depths of the chasm. It's coming. Yolanda turned and walked away. Leave the edge of the chasm. It would be bad if we were to be caught by it. From inside the chasm came a rumbling voice that sounded like a clap of thunder. Who knew what kind of monster was trying to climb out of the chasm? Even if Yolanda hadn't said anything, there was no idiot who would have stayed by the side of the chasm. Everyone turned around and followed Zen, leaving the edge of the chasm to get to a relatively safe place. What is it? Esther asked. No matter what it was probably not much smaller than the mad scorpion to be able to create such a huge commotion in the chasm. Actually, you've all seen it before, Yolanda replied. We've seen it before. Everyone was shocked. Yolanda nodded. It's the plant that chased us all the way here. What we saw were just the roots protruding out of the ground. Its main body is in here. Lavender smiled coldly. It's just a heavenly immortal root. Why is it coming up? Zen asked. Yolanda, however, only said, you'll soon understand. As the roar became louder and louder, the sound became deafening to all of their ears. Zen and the others had no choice but to use their life vitality to temporarily seal off their own hearing. As the thing in the chasm got closer and closer to the opening, fear and anxiety became apparent on everyone's face. But despite the loud noise, the mad scorpion was still fast asleep. It's here, Yolanda said as she stared into the distance. Sure enough, the next moment, everyone saw a giant plant climbing out of the chasm. On top of the plant, there was an incomparably strange and ugly face. The most frightening thing was that the strange face was facing them. The face of this giant plant wasn't much smaller than the head of the mad scorpion. It was around the size of a mountain. However, the two eyeballs on its face were staring straight at Zen's group. Chapter 647, The Roar. Everyone's heart suddenly skipped a beat. Let alone these people, even powerful warriors of the Soul Sea realm would be dwarfed by the size of the monster. They looked like ants in comparison to it, and they instantly knew that they wouldn't stand a chance against it. Turn around, don't look at it, and cover your ears, Yolanda quickly ordered as she turned her head away from the huge monster. Quickly, the others followed suit. They turned their heads around and covered their ears as well. Any form of resistance was useless now. Ah-oh! The heavenly immortal root suddenly raised its head and roared. The loud sound caused the entire dark nether cave to tremble. As a result, the many sharp stalactites growing from the ceiling of the dark nether cave began breaking, and one by one, they smashed and fell down on the cave's floor. One of the stalactites, which was over 200 feet long, headed towards the group. At that very moment, Yolanda's eyes narrowed. As if on instinct, she raised her hand. A ray of light shot out from her finger, and it instantly shattered the crashing stalactite into many little pieces. As the whole cave shook, the root continued to roar fiercely. 5 minutes passed until the cave was silent again. Yolanda then turned to the others and said in a hushed voice, "The mad scorpion has awoken. Be ready." Everyone's face contorted to show confusion, fear, and uncertainty. The giant beast had been sleeping, but obviously, it was impossible for it to continue sleeping when something as huge as the root roared relentlessly. Together, everyone turned around to look at the mad scorpion, and sure enough, it had already opened its eyes. Boom! Since the mad scorpion had only woken up from its long slumber, its eyes were still unfocused. With its huge palm, it touched the top of its head. As it did that, the dark nether death light above its head suddenly grew several times stronger. The scarlet light enveloped the entire dark nether cave, brighter and stronger than even the sunlight. Even the fog might not be able to stop this light. If there are other warriors inside the dark nether cave, I'm sure that they have been killed, Esther quietly said, her head lowered. Fortunately, because of the tide of chaos, most of the warriors had returned to the Tower of Sin. Only a small number of them wanted to take advantage of the tide of chaos to obtain greater chances in finding treasures inside the cave. And since they dared to take risks, they had to accept the cost that came with it, even if it was their lives. The mad scorpion's huge head slowly turned around to glance at the heavenly immortal root. Then it suddenly opened its huge mouth and roared back at the root. "Oh!" Yolanda's expression turned to fear as she said to Zen urgently, "Quick, make a deep pit." As the mad scorpion started howling, a huge hurricane formed. Luckily, the abyss was incomparably huge, and so although the hurricane had an awful lot of force, it would still take some time for it to blow over. As soon as Yolanda finished speaking, Zen and Malcolm took action. Zen used all of his strength at once, including the power of dragon scales, and Malcolm also pushed himself to his limits. Nobody knew how strong the hurricane was, but they wouldn't risk being against it. While it was okay to be swept away like that, they would instantly die if they left Zen and were exposed to the dark nether death light emitting from the mad scorpion's head. Bang, bang, bang. Under the powerful forces emitted by both Zen and Malcolm, a huge crater that was more than 100 feet deep was formed. Without wasting any time, they immediately jumped into it, hoping it was enough to spare them from all the dangers of the cave. Immediately after entering the crater, Zen and Malcolm continued deepening the crater, blasting the ground with their powerful attacks. Soon enough, they were in a pit with a depth of 300 feet. The moment everyone was able to get to the bottom of the pit, even before all of them could catch their breath, they heard the sound of a raging wind coming from above them. The wind swept past their pit, and a great amount of dust and rocks were blown in. They hit their faces, and it felt as if there were knives cutting through them. Fabian and the others immediately directed their life vitality to protect themselves. Rihan was a bit too slow. As a result, the wind had left many wounds all over his body, making him an appalling sight to behold. "Are we deep enough?" Zen screamed, looking up with a nervous expression. They saw the edges of the pit constantly collapsing as the fierce wind danced around it. Slowly it dawned on them that the wind was trying to level the pit. In just a few seconds, the pit that was over 300 feet deep was indeed leveled. "Continue digging down," Malcolm shouted loudly and directed his force to the ground again. Zen didn't stop either. The others joined the two and continued to deepen the pit. Bang, bang, bang. The huge pit they were in was constantly being leveled by the strong wind, and so they kept digging downwards. They went deeper underground in hopes of avoiding the strong wind that seemed to be looking for them. The mad scorpion's roar was many times louder than the one from the heavenly immortal root. With just one roar, the entire dark nether cave was thrown into chaos. On the 10th floor of the Tower of Sin, Teresa from the Demon Knight had just come out of the talent tablet. After accepting the test of the talent tablet, her talent had reached the 3rd row. This result was quite outstanding, considering she was a member of the Demon Knight. Currently, in the Tower of Sin, she was the one with the best results among the members of her race. However, there wasn't the slightest bit of happiness on her face. On the contrary, there was only endless loneliness and fear. When she had first entered the Tower of Sin, she had solemnly vowed to challenge and defeat Zen. However, Zen's golden name, like a big mouth, mocked her for overestimating her abilities. She had realized that she had no right to treat Zen as her opponent. Teresa gritted her teeth as she continued walking towards the arena with her weapon in hand. Never in her life did she concede. Even if Zen's talent was far greater than hers, she would still put in 10 times the effort to try and defeat him. One day, she thought, "I will surpass you, Zen." Now that Zen, who had improved rapidly and massively and had already climbed up to the 14th floor, was inside the dark nether cave, she didn't have the chance to challenge him anymore. Just as Teresa was about to enter the arena, a violent vibration came from beneath her feet, followed by a deep roar. It was a roar that came from underground. The creatures of many races looked at each other with nervous expressions. They were well aware that underneath the Tower of Sin, or perhaps the entire cursed land, was the dark nether cave. However, they didn't know who let out such a loud roar. Could it be that some monster was approaching the Tower of Sin? What kind of monster is that? It makes such a loud noise. My goodness. The people who entered the dark nether cave must be in trouble now. It seems that there's something strange going on in the cave. You have no idea. Due to the tide of chaos recently, most of the top-level warlords have retreated, and only a small portion of them are still in the cave. I heard that Zen and Esther from the Demon Knight haven't returned. Looks like they're going to die in there. The intense roar lasted for a long time, and the entire Tower of Sin continued trembling. Besides those in the Tower of Sin, people throughout the cursed land heard the roar as well. 2 hours later, the roar had even spread throughout the entire Sea God continent. In the heavenly feather sacred place, the purple-clad Amber stood on the top of the huge holy tree. Her sharp ears were alert, listening for more. When the violent roar spread from underground, the holy tree of the demon knight started to tremble. The holy tree had a soul. It uneasily confided its fear to Amber. At that moment, all the living beings in the sacred place of the demon knight were terrified. It was as if the end of the world was drawing nigh. Don't be afraid. Take it easy. Amber gently caressed the tree, communicating with it in a soft voice to soothe its trembling heart. Apart from the heavenly feather sacred place, the purple heart sacred place of the human race, the flaming ogre sacred place and the dread ogre sacred place of the ogres, the eternal night sacred place of the night group, and all the living creatures in the sacred places of the various races were all filled with unease and fear. A full 2,000 feet. Within a short period of time, Zen and Malcolm had repeatedly hammered the ground and they had dug a huge pit that was 2,000 feet deep. The rocks and mud that had accumulated overhead almost buried them. However, even though they were hiding in such a deep pit, it did not lessen the unease in their hearts. The roar was simply too dreadful. After a long time, the roar gradually faded away. Because of the long distance, the gale above their heads gradually dissipated. After making sure that it was already safe, everyone started moving the rocks and soil above their heads away and slowly made their way out of the pit. Chapter 648. Swallowed by the Mad Scorpion. The interaction between the Mad Scorpion and the heavenly immortal root created strong gales that blew away more than 1,000 feet in depth of soil surrounding the chasm. With the onslaught of the strong gales, the 2,000 feet deep pit that Zen and his companions had dug turned useless as it only seemed to be like 100 or so feet against the raging force. The group couldn't keep still, so all of them began climbing out of the pit as their hearts pounded wildly. As soon as they slightly emerged out of the pit, they felt their limbs shake as they took in that chaotic scene. In great apprehension, they watched the intense battle unfolding above the abyss. They seemed to be musing in unison that being able to survive this kind of havoc was indeed a blessing. The Mad Scorpion wildly roared as it rushed straight towards the heavenly immortal root, which was equally savage. Nevertheless, the terrifying and ear-splitting sound the Mad Scorpion grumbled did not cause any damage to the heavenly immortal root. Instead, the latter quickly twisted its enormous root, which was as thick as a mountain, and brandished its ugly head to charge aggressively towards the Mad Scorpion. Bang! A booming sound soon reverberated in the air. That Mad Scorpion's physical attributes were a bit deceiving. It looked huge, creating an impression of being slow and sluggish, but its movements were surprisingly agile. Just as the heavenly immortal root reached its head over, the Mad Scorpion's pincer landed on its hideous head with so much precision as a counterattack. The sound of this slap was like hundreds of thunderclaps exploding at the same time. On the other hand, Zen and the others could only temporarily shut off their hearings with their skills. Otherwise, the sound of the slap would surely damage their hearing abilities. Roar! After being assailed, the heavenly immortal root turned its head again as if nothing happened and continued to rush towards its opponent. But then another attack from the Mad Scorpion followed. That slap was so terrifyingly powerful that if it landed on the Sea God continent, it would surely destroy even a mountain range. Bang! 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 After a series of continuous slaps, the incomparably ferocious heavenly immortal root finally succumbed to its defeat against the Mad Scorpion. Lavender glanced at Zen and told him with her life vitality, the heavenly immortal root is nothing but only a type of vegetable. Vegetable! Zen's eyes were fixated on the battle between the giant monsters as he repeated it in a daze. Right, it's a type of vegetable used to feed super legendary beasts. If you don't believe me, you can ask the cyan dragon in your mind, Lavender said with a smile. Zen was indeed a bit curious, so he asked, man, is that so? Don't listen to her nonsense. You know, strong warriors like me don't need to eat anything. The cyan dragon, however, wasn't willing to admit it. But you needed to eat before you became strong. What did you eat then? Zen teasingly asked. He could tell that the cyan dragon didn't want to admit it. I didn't eat it before. The cyan dragon chuckled and denied it. The genuine dragon world is rich in resources. Although the heavenly immortal root is nutritious, its taste is horrible. Only the Mad Scorpion can endure that peculiar taste. We genuine dragons would never eat it. It looks so hideous. The sizes of an ordinary legendary beast and the flood dragon puppet, which was seen by Zen previously, were almost the same. And this was considered normal. On the contrary, a super legendary beast could grow as large as a continent. And that would mean food must be in abundance. Super legendary beasts could prey on each other. But none of them was weak. Besides, they were only a minority. As a result, even though they were all on top of the food chain, food was still scarce for them. They could hardly find sustenance to make them strong enough and to reach the stage where they didn't need to eat anything. As a result, most super legendary beasts relied on vegetables to grow up. Such a huge heavenly immortal root was one of the food for these huge fierce beasts. Soon, the heavenly immortal root was subdued by the mad scorpion. The mad scorpion stretched out its claws, strangled the root, and opened its huge mouth. What do we do now? Zen looked expectantly at Yolanda, waiting for her answer. Everyone stared pitifully at Yolanda. They were also frightened by what was happening in front of them. Even though Fabian, Esther, and the others had gone through the cultivation of the gate of samsara, their emotions were still in disarray now. Such fight between the mad scorpion and the heavenly immortal root was just too horrifying and appalling. Yolanda had agreed in her own accord to lead everyone out of the fog, but they didn't expect her to take them to such a dangerous place. What was going on? They had no idea at all. Everyone, grab Zen. Yolanda stretched out her hands nimbly and seized hold of Zen. Not understanding the meaning behind her words, Zen wore a strange expression as he gazed at Yolanda. The others didn't understand either, but they still followed Yolanda's orders hastily as if it was a conditioned reflex. Esther also stretched out her hands and clutched Zen's arm. The other top-level warlords also quickly grabbed hold of him. Malcolm's reaction wasn't slow either as he clasped Zen's neck. Hey! Zen felt uncomfortable being firmly grasped by them like this, but his resistance was useless. The others continued to clasp him tightly as if they would lose their lives once they let him go. Rihan was the last to react. When he started moving, Zen had already been tightly encircled by everyone, and there was no place on Zen for him to grab anymore. Without any other choice, he could only hug Malcolm tightly. If he couldn't get hold of Zen, then clinging to Malcolm was also a choice. Lavender directly stuffed the long spear into Zen's space ring, then immediately transformed into small light spots and flew into Zen's body. Soon after they were all ready, they heard the sound of the wind blowing. Whoosh, whoosh, a huge attraction force was released from the mad scorpion's mouth. Like the gales they had just experienced, they could not resist this attractive force. It was way beyond their abilities. In the blink of an eye, everyone's feet left the ground, and they were directly pulled towards the sky above the chasm. Everyone held onto Zen tightly as they rolled around in the air and flew towards the mad scorpion's mouth. What's going on? Malcolm was shocked and furious. He roared at Yolanda angrily. He had never expected that she would have them be sucked into the mad scorpion's mouth. Wasn't this courting death? Yolanda, what is going on? Even Esther, who had always been calm, had a long face right now. If they only had continued to dig underground and hid in the pit, they could have completely avoided being sucked into the mad scorpion's mouth. If the mad scorpion swallowed them in one gulp, they would be dead for sure. Fabian also cried out with a sad face, "We're dead for sure this time." Yolanda, didn't you say you'd take us out of the fog? Why are we going to be sucked into that monster's mouth? Yolanda blinked her eyes. At the questioning of the crowd, her expression did not change at all. Instead, she said indifferently, "If you want to leave the fog, you must enter its mouth. I did nothing wrong. It is my plan. Can you at least tell us first?" Jared said with a conflicted expression as he tightly hugged Zen's arm. "There's no need for that. If you do what I tell you, you might not die. But if you don't do what I tell you, you will definitely die." Yolanda blinked and turned her head to the side, sniffing Zen's chest. She still had time to smell Zen's scent. What a crazy woman. "Hey, guys, can you be gentler? My bones are about to break." Zen interjected with a bitter smile. How could they be willing to listen to Zen? As soon as they let him go, they would immediately be shot to death by the dark nether death light. So naturally, everyone held onto Zen tightly for their dear lives. The group danced and dangled in the air, quickly revolving and being sucked into the mad scorpion's big mouth. They felt dreadful as they witnessed the heavenly immortal root being sucked into its big mouth, piece by piece. For the heavenly immortal root, the mad scorpion's mouth could be called simply as a mouth. However, to Zen and the others, it was like a huge cave that was tens of thousands of feet high. Even if 10 mountain ranges were placed side by side, they could still be stuffed easily into the mouth of the mad scorpion. As far as the mad scorpion was concerned, Zen's group could not even be considered ants or dust. They were merely close to nothingness. It was more likely that they didn't exist in the mad scorpion's line of sight. Bang, bang, Bang! A few 10 feet wide boulders were also sucked over by the mad scorpion. Some of the boulders directly smashed into Zen and the others. However, before the boulders could hit them, they were immediately broken by Yolanda's and the others' attacks. After flying above the chasm for a while, they were eventually pulled inside the mad scorpion's mouth. At that precise moment, the life vitality within everyone's body suddenly disappeared strangely. As for Malcolm and Rihan, their expressions changed greatly. The forceful energy within their bodies had also vanished. Zen, who possessed both the life vitality and the forceful energy, found himself in the same situation. Whether it was life vitality or forceful energy, both faded without a trace at the same time. Earlier, when they were constantly being tossed around in the sky, they were still able to rely on their life vitality or forceful energy to stabilize their bodies. But now, their life vitality or forceful energy had strangely disappeared. They soon found themselves suddenly being blown around by the turbulent winds, falling heavily into the darkness. Chapter 649, The World Within the Mad Scorpion's Body. Malcolm and Esther had always been relying on their life vitality or forceful energy to be strong and powerful. Now that they had lost these things, their main bodies were only slightly stronger than ordinary creatures, so as they fell and hit other objects in the darkness, they became dizzy from the impact just like everyone else. And since the crab ornament on Zen's chest couldn't be nourished by his life vitality, the orange barrier of light around it had completely disappeared. Luckily, the dark nether death light that had shot out of the mad scorpion's head didn't reach them. Otherwise, everyone would have been killed instantly by the red light. The crowd could no longer hold onto Zen's body as they continued to roll down and scatter. The size of the inside of this gigantic beast far exceeded everyone's imagination. Since the mad scorpion lay at the edge of the abyss, no one knew the length of its body. Its huge body extended all the way to the darkness below, but the part of its body that everyone could see above the abyss was already indescribably huge, like the ominous tip of an iceberg. Zen was still fine. Although he had collided with something along the way, his body was more solid than everything else. The giant rock that had been sucked into the mad scorpion's stomach hit Zen, but Zen remained unharmed. In fact, the rock was smashed into 1,000 pieces instead. On the other hand, everyone else was in danger. Since Esther, Fabian, and the others couldn't activate their life vitality, they didn't have anything to protect them. In this situation, even a small rock that was thrown at them could cause them to bleed. It was fortunate that the inner walls of the mad scorpion were soft. Otherwise, just bumping about along the inside of the mad scorpion's body would be enough to kill them. When they finally hit a surface, they crawled there in the darkness for over 10 minutes. Esther let out a muffled sound and they all fell back and forth until they reached the bottom. After passing through the dark passage, they were surprised to discover that there was a magical light in the mad scorpion's stomach. But Zen was the only one who was in the mood to inspect their surroundings. Except for Zen and Yolanda, everyone was injured. Esther was the most severely injured one, with several wounds on her body and a portion of her clothes stained red with blood. Even Malcolm and Rihan, who were physically strong, were injured. Rihan was practically limping as he crawled up from the ground, and Malcolm's face was swollen to the point of looking comical. On the other hand, Fabian and Jared looked fine and didn't seem to be seriously injured. Anyway, serious physical injuries were nothing to a warrior and were considered minor flesh wounds. All of them took out healing medicines and swallowed them. Then, they joined Zen and Yolanda in examining their surroundings. The environment inside the mad scorpion's stomach was far beyond Zen's expectations. It seemed as large and spacious as the dark nether cave, but in the end, it was still a cave. If they flew upward, they would touch the wall of the cave. So even though the cave was huge, it seemed cramped and suffocating. The dusky, yellow environment constantly reminded the warriors that they were still in a cave. However, this cave was so large that it took up a considerable portion of the entire sea god continent. Of course, it was still smaller than the dark nether cave. After all, the mad scorpion itself was just a part of the dark nether cave. Nevertheless, the cave seemed to be endless. Even the sky seemed blue. This was a completely different world. Moreover, they could see tall mountains, rivers, and plants. When they looked at this space from afar, it seemed no different from the boundless great worlds. Why is there such a world inside the mad scorpion's belly? Zen asked in surprise. Yolanda nodded. Yes, this is the small world within the mad scorpion's belly. It has a small world inside its body. Zen asked in astonishment. Zen had been to the small world at the top of the Tower of Sin and discovered that he could freely create the environment inside it. In fact, there was a chance that the 128 small worlds there had been created by the original owner of the Tower of Sin. At this moment, Esther changed her clothes. After she took care of her wounds, she walked over and said, "It is said that after a warrior reaches the soul sea realm, the life vitality within his body will turn into a sea shrouded in a hazy life vitality fog and will form a world. That is why it's called the soul sea realm. But the body of the soul sea realm warrior won't be able to create lands and creatures. It's only when a warrior reaches a higher level that he'll be able to create a world where creatures can be born and even cultivate." Yolanda nodded again. Indeed, some of the masters of the upper world have small worlds in their bodies which contain their own kingdoms. There are tens of millions of living beings within them. There are even wars between those living beings. Zen was amazed by what he was hearing. A warrior's body could form a world. The creatures within that world could cultivate too. At the thought of this, Zen suddenly had a flash of enlightenment. He thought of the entire universe and wondered whether the numerous great worlds were also inside the body of some living being. He immediately asked Yolanda about this. Before Yolanda could say anything, lavender appeared from within Zen's body. She smiled and replied, "No one can answer this question." "Why?" Zen asked curiously. "We've been trying to figure out the answer to your question for millions of years, but no one has been able to solve it," Lavender said, shaking her head. Zen nodded in understanding. If he'd been able to think about this matter, it went without saying that the Supreme Masters in the upper world would have also thought about it. Some warriors had already guessed that after they reached the Soul Sea realm, their bodies would be able to form their own Soul Sea, and that once their cultivation increased, their Soul Sea would slowly expand. Then, sky, earth, and even living beings would gradually appear inside it. In the same way, the whole universe might also be inside the body of some creature. It was a pity that no one in the upper world could reach the exit of the universe even though countless warriors had explored it. Some warriors thought that it was a stupid hypothesis and that there was no exit to the universe. That's not the matter we have to care about right now. Yolanda, what should we do next? Malcolm asked with an unfriendly expression, striding over to Yolanda. In this small world, life vitality and forceful energy were prohibited, so they all could only rely on their own physical body. The pair of black wings on Malcolm's back had already disappeared. It was obvious that he was feeling defenseless and on edge. However, Yolanda just ignored Malcolm's words and coldly uttered, "Follow me." Malcolm didn't have the patience to do so. He stretched out his large hands toward Yolanda, but just as he reached out, Yolanda, who was wearing a pair of clogs, shook her body and leapt onto Malcolm's bulky arm. Taking 2 steps forward on his arm, she wrapped her arms around Malcolm's forearm and fiercely pressed down on it, taking advantage of her full body weight. Crack! Everyone heard the sound of a bone cracking. Malcolm let out a miserable scream as his thick arm became limp and tilted to one side. Rihan was startled. Just as he was about to charge over, Yolanda jumped down from Malcolm's arm. Her petite figure was in stark contrast to Malcolm's massive body. She gave Rihan a cold look and said, "If you want to leave this place and return to the tower alive, don't talk rubbish." She had shocked everyone by breaking Malcolm's arm with a mere twist. No matter how powerful she was still a 10th level war general. But now, she had broken Malcolm's arm with just one strike. Yolanda didn't care about the gazes of the surrounding warriors. She walked forward alone, while Malcolm, dragging his broken arm, took out a pill from his pocket and swallowed it. Even if the healing medicine's effect was really good, it would still take a few days for his broken arm to be completely healed. Zen's eyes lit up as a thought struck him. After entering the belly of the giant beast, no one could rely on their life vitality and forceful energy. In that case, only the lowest level martial skills could truly work there. What Yolanda had just used was contortion, the most common martial art of an ordinary warrior. Even if Yolanda's strength was far inferior to Malcolm's, she had been able to easily break Malcolm's arm with her technique. Chapter 650, The Murderous Rats. Malcolm didn't say anything. He could still rely on his strength to keep him safe inside the dark nether cave. However, with his forceful energy being completely blocked, he couldn't exert his strength to the full. Now, there was nothing he could do except for keeping his chin up. The land ahead of them was empty. There was nothing there but some withered shrubs. However, this didn't mean that they dared relax their vigilance. They were afraid that some demonic beasts or monsters might suddenly appear and pounce on them. The group followed closely behind Yolanda. However, Lavender, in her incorporeal form, was floating next to Zen. As his sword spirit she had no weight at all. Although some unknown power in this world had restrained everyone's life vitality and forceful energy, it only exerted a minimal influence on Lavender. While everyone was walking forward, Yolanda's footsteps suddenly slowed and eventually stopped. "What is it?" Esther asked in alarm, her hand going to the small knife which she carried. The warriors who had lost their life vitality were like tigers with their teeth pulled out. If they were confronted by some fierce beasts, they would not be able to fend off their attacks. Yolanda's gaze was fixed on a place not far ahead of them. Behind a pile of grass a fat, innocent-looking rat had stuck its head out. Its two soybean-sized eyes cautiously measured Zen and his companions. Its whiskers trembled in the air as it regarded them. "It's just a rat," Malcolm sneered, trying to brush past them to continue walking. "Be careful of those murderous rats," Yolanda warned seriously, restraining him with a raised arm. What? Given all that had happened, everyone was jumpy and scared of everything around them. Besides, during this adventure, they had come to know Yolanda better. If it wasn't extremely dangerous, she wouldn't raise the alarm at all. They all looked around vigilantly. Fabian and Jared had even drawn their swords to prepare for any possible enemy attack. There are many more of those rats. Fabian saw that 3 to 4 rats were lurking behind each and every clump of grass up ahead. "Just some rats, not something you should worry about," Jared said while shaking his head in denial of the seriousness of the situation. "They're coming," Yolanda warned again. Just then, everyone heard a squeaking sound. It was abnormally sharp and with very rhythmic variation in the sound. It seemed as if it was some form of communication. Hearing this squeaking sound, the innocent-looking rats seemed to grow restless. Their bean-sized black eyes were now glistening with ferocious luster. Their hair stood on end and appeared as sharp as needles. The rats were squeaking with excitement. Then, more of the murderous rats rushed out of their caves, and in the blink of an eye, the ground was full of them, crawling, running, and squeaking. Some of them were already rushing towards Zen, intent on devouring him alive. "Hump, those rats are so bold," Malcolm said and took 2 steps forward. Though one of his arms had been broken by Yolanda, he could still try to scatter the rats by swinging his good arm. He lifted his foot and tried to kick them away. Malcolm was wearing steel boots made of black iron. Given his massive body, even if he didn't use his forceful energy, he could still create a hole with just one kick of his leg. Boom! These murderous rats were however abnormally agile, and Malcolm's kicks all missed. The 5 to 6 murderous rats dispersed quickly and scurried onto Malcolm. Some of them even wormed their way into his armor and began to gnaw through his flesh. Malcolm felt the sharp pain as their teeth sank into his skin, and he tried his best to endure the agony while cursing in rage. He reached out his hand to slap at them as they crawled over his body, and finally caught a murderous rat. He slammed the creature onto the ground heavily, turning it into a bloody mess under his heel. There was nothing special about these rats, except for them being annoyingly agile. However, more and more murderous rats were coming out of their nearby caves. If any of these warriors had been capable of using his or her life vitality, those rats would have been wiped out completely in mere seconds. Now, they all grew increasingly desperate. "Get out of here, stay and we'll all die," Esther said as a rotating wheel appeared in her hand. The rotating wheel ruthlessly slaughtered the rats which dared come near her. "Let's go." Fabian raised his sword, and it effectively pierced through dozens of murderous rats as he stabbed out with it. Seizing the opportunity, the warriors ran forward as quickly as possible. However, Malcolm and Rehan could only move slowly. Both of them wore heavy suits of armor which they had spent a great deal of money refining. Although wearing this armor could enhance the wearer's defense against attack by most enemies, the suits also hindered their mobility and agility. They were basically reduced to great lumbering metal plates. Without using their life vitality, the other warriors could still move quickly. After all, their bodies were enhanced as they had entered the nature level. Now, the open field had been filled with hundreds of those murderous rats. They were coming out of the caves by the dozen and they seemed to be unstoppable. Trapped and surrounded by these murderous rats, a warrior might soon be torn apart by them. Whoosh! Zen's long sword lashed out at the rats, and dozens of them were instantly halved. However, hundreds of rats appeared on Zen's left flank, forming into dark waves and coming at him with ferocious determination. Before he could respond, he was engulfed by thousands of rats. They packed all over his body, knocking him off from his feet. Zen, Fabian and Jared were greatly frightened by the sight of Zen being taken down. Yolanda frowned, but didn't move or go to Zen's rescue. Being surrounded and attacked by hundreds of rats, Esther couldn't get away or move to help Zen. Malcolm and Rihan were being badly bitten by the murderous rats, despite them being strong and tall. They tried to push forward, stamped their feet and shook their arms to get the rats off their bodies. Malcolm grinned when he saw Zen fall down under the attack of the murderous rats. He had really wanted to kill Zen, despite them being in the same boat, but he hadn't been able to find an opportunity to murder him. If Zen was bitten to death by these disgusting creatures, then that would be more than satisfactory for Malcolm. Lavender, floating near Zen, stabbed at a rat with her long spear. She blinked then, and a faint smile appeared on her face. Suddenly Zen's dangerous situation didn't seem to bother her at all. This place had really restricted these warriors' life vitality and forceful energy. However, Lavender knew the secrets of Zen's body. Even those common fairy weapons hadn't been able to leave a mark on Zen's body, and these insignificant and disgusting rats were no threat to his safety either. The number of murderous rats pouncing on Zen had increased quickly, and he was soon completely engulfed by these creatures. As seconds passed by, the small hill forming over Zen became larger and larger. Soon it was a small mountain of rats which covered him. Go get Zen. Even now, Fabian couldn't forget his mission. After killing dozens of murderous rats, he rushed over to Zen, followed closely by Jared. Before he could reach Zen, Lavender's long spear stretched before him and barred his path. What are you doing? If we don't save him now, there'll be nothing left of him. Fabian asked anxiously, his face filled with confusion. He knew that Lavender was Zen's sword spirit, and if he was killed, she wouldn't live either. However, Lavender looked relaxed, bored even, and not at all concerned about Zen's safety. Lavender answered indifferently, "Don't worry, he's fine." Just as she finished speaking, they saw the murderous rats which were gnawing at Zen's body started to scatter in all directions. Then, they heard a muffled sound coming from where Zen was trapped. Boom! The thousands of rats on Zen's body were all sent flying into the air at the same time, falling in all directions. Their bodies were crushed and they went limp. Zen just stood there, in the nude, as his clothes had been torn apart by the rats. His body was barely bruised or hurt. Yolanda stared at his naked body and blinked, wondering how could he have succeeded in resisting those disgusting rats. Meanwhile, Esther and Lavender looked at Zen boldly. Since females enjoyed superior status to males in the Demon Knight, his naked body didn't make them blush with embarrassment at all. However, Zen's face had turned a bright red. Those rats had really embarrassed him. He hurriedly took a suit of clothes from his space ring which he donned while trying to avoid all the eyes which were focused on him. Chapter 651, Green-Skinned Creature. Although Zen couldn't use the forceful energy and life vitality in this place, he could still rely on the power of the dragon scales inside his body. He had only used the power of over 100 dragon scales, but the force of the huge vibration had instantly killed all the murderous rats that were attached to him. For Esther, Fabian, and some of the others, these murderous rats might have been troublesome to deal with. But for Zen, they hadn't even been a threat. They couldn't cause him any harm. Facing this group of murderous rats, everyone fought valiantly as they walked forward, forcefully slashing a path painted by blood. At this moment, the sound of banging drums suddenly came from the distant wilderness. Bang, bang, bang. When the drumming sound began to ring out, Zen and the others heard a squeaking noise. As the noise echoed in the air, all the murderous rats that were charging toward Zen and the others suddenly dispersed, fleeing in all directions. They crawled into the ground and disappeared in an instant. That squeaking sound might be from the king of these murderous rats, Zen said as he looked at the corpses of the murderous rats scattered around on the ground behind him like a long, dark line trailing behind. Moments later, dozens of black shadows rushed toward Zen from the sky above the wilderness. From this distance, the other warriors with Zen weren't able to see what they were clearly. A green film of light appeared over Zen's eyes. His brows knitted together as he discerned the shadowy figures using his magic vision. These things are able to fly in the air. The creatures flying in the air were neither humans nor ogres, much less members of the Demon Knight. Zen had never seen such creatures before. They were covered in a layer of green scales and all held a long spear in their hands. In an instant, they surrounded the group of warriors. The creature in the lead glanced at the group of warriors before raising his long spear in the air and staring at Zen from above. He uttered words in a strange language that none of the warriors had heard before. Zen and the others looked at one another with confusion written all over their faces. They didn't dare to make a move. Now, it seemed that in this small world where life vitality and forceful energy were forbidden, there might exist other cultivation methods that Zen and the others were unaware of. What are they? Fabian asked with a frown. Esther shook her head. Perhaps they're the aboriginals of this world. What should we do now? It seems that they want to attack us, Malcolm said in a muffled voice. Just now, he had suffered a lot of attacks from the murderous rats. From the moment he'd entered into the mad scorpion's body, he had been constantly suffering setbacks. Why should we feel afraid? If they dare to attack us, we'll fight them to the death. Rihan glared at the creatures in the sky as he spoke. Hearing this, everyone immediately stared at Rihan as though they were looking at an idiot. These creatures didn't seem to be very strong in terms of cultivation level, but their cultivation systems were completely different. The truth was, the warriors had no idea what the strength level of these creatures was, but the mere fact that they could fly in the sky already left the warriors at a disadvantage. At this moment, the green-skinned creature in the lead suddenly stopped speaking. He raised his big ears and listened carefully for a while. Everyone wondered what the green-skinned creature was doing. Then, they saw him brandishing his spear toward the ground. A wave of formless energy burst out from his spear and tore the ground apart. Crack, crack, crack. Crack, crack, a 10 feet wide crack instantly appeared on the ground. As the crack extended into the distance and reached the end of this place, there was a violent explosion. Bam! The impact of the explosion immediately flung dirt up into the air. From the crack, a brownish-yellow murderous rat shot out. Joy appeared on the face of the green-skinned creature when he saw the murderous rat. He instantly rushed toward the murderous rat and grabbed it firmly in his hand. No matter how much the murderous rat wriggled and struggled in his hand, it wasn't able to break free of his grasp. This murderous rat is probably the king of the group of murderous rats that attacked us, Zen said with furrowed eyebrows as he watched the green-skinned creature seize the rat king in his hand. Well, yes, and this murderous rat king probably ordered the other murderous rats to attack us, Fabian said, nodding. But right now, their focus wasn't on the murderous rat king but on the green-skinned creature. His astonishing demonstration of power shocked everyone. If they could all still use their life vitality, or even their forceful energy, then every single one of them could easily achieve what the green-skinned creature had done. It wouldn't be difficult for them to launch a strike 10 times stronger than that. But in this situation where they couldn't use their life vitality, even Esther and Fabian couldn't do what the green-skinned creature had done. It was only after witnessing this scene that Rihan realized how naive he had been to think of fighting with the green-skinned creatures. Zen was also silent and grim-faced. Even though he couldn't use his life vitality and forceful energy, he still had his own tough body and brute force to rely on. If he had to fight with these green-skinned creatures, he'd still have a chance of winning. His only worry was that this group of green-skinned creatures were merely the vanguard and that there might be more powerful ones to come. After the green-skinned creature caught the murderous rat king, he started chatting with the other green-skinned creatures. When they finished their conversation, they looked at the group of warriors with a murderous expression. Of course, all the warriors noticed the murderous expression on their faces. They all immediately understood that they were going to fight. They weren't timid warriors who would just stand there and wait for their deaths. When it was time to fight, they would go all out without the slightest bit of hesitation. All of them turned vigilant. As for Zen, his hand was ready on his space ring. The moment the opponents made a move, he would take out the broken flying knife from his space ring. He was confident that even if he used brute force to shoot the flying knife, he could instantly kill one or two green-skinned creatures. Suddenly, Yolanda raised her head and murmured something in an unknown language. Everyone was shocked when they heard the words that came out of Yolanda's mouth. They'd never imagined that one of them would be able to speak the language of these green-skinned creatures. The green-skinned creatures were equally astonished to hear Yolanda's words. They exchanged puzzled glances with one another before one of them turned to Yolanda and replied in their language. Yolanda spoke again, but this time, she seemed to be arguing with the green-skinned creature about something. The green-skinned creature who was speaking to Yolanda went silent for a while. Then, he took out a large net from his back and threw it toward the group. Everyone was about to rush away to avoid getting caught in the net when they heard Yolanda say, "Don't move." "What do you mean?" Esther asked, frowning. They were all getting more and more impatient with Yolanda. She kept putting them in increasingly dangerous situations. "I've persuaded them not to kill us, but they want to keep us as captives," Yolanda replied. "But what will happen after they capture us?" Fabian asked. By then, they were all already trapped inside the large net. However, even though this large net had trapped Zen and the others, it couldn't trap Lavender. She easily escaped from the net. One of the green-skinned creatures pointed at Lavender and said something. Lavender blinked her eyes. She was short-tempered and didn't hesitate to raise her spear at them. But before she could attack, Yolanda said, "Lavender, stop." "Why? I don't have to listen to you." Lavender hadn't liked Yolanda from the start, so she didn't want to listen to her now. "If you want Zen to leave this place safe and sound, you must listen to me," Yolanda said firmly. The moment Lavender heard this, she immediately paused. Of course she didn't want Zen to be trapped here for the rest of his life. In the end, she threw the long spear into the space ring that hung on Zen's chest. Then, she turned into a dot of red light and whirled into Zen's body. This had caught the attention of the green-skinned creatures. They were all staring greedily at the space ring on Zen's chest. However, they didn't move toward it. The green-skinned creatures in the sky each pulled a rope and lifted up the large net. All the warriors were dragged up into the air. This large net seemed to be woven with special golden silk which couldn't be damaged by an ordinary sword. And given that everyone was tightly bound by the large net, it was almost impossible for them to break free. Now that they're taking us back to their lair, we're completely at their mercy. They can kill us whenever they want. Jared exclaimed angrily. Yolanda, you said that you had a way to get us out of the fog, so what's this? We're doomed now, Esther added. Malcolm remained silent. Yolanda had broken his arm earlier, so he didn't dare to say anything now. Yolanda sneered. You were trapped in the fog and you would eventually be pulled into the abyss by the fog array. Without me, you would have already died. No one dared to utter a sound hearing this. Chapter 652, 3 Powers. Being outside the mad scorpion's body didn't mean they could get rid of the fog. Yolanda was right about this. No matter how much they tried to move, they were taken to the abyss. All of them figured that they were unable to fight against the dark nether death light. If it had not been for the crab-shaped ornament on Zen's chest, all of them could have already been killed by the light. During such a threatening situation, they could only follow Yolanda's advice. What are these green-skinned creatures? Zen asked, his curiosity evident on his face. Esther guessed right. They are the aboriginals of this world, Yolanda replied. But why would they want to kill us? Zen asked again. They live inside the mad scorpion's body, and it's these aboriginals' duty to kill any intruders, Yolanda answered. What did you say that changed their minds? Zen asked, glancing towards Yolanda with a serious look on his face. You'll get your answer very soon, she said, avoiding making any more statements. Even though they were trapped inside that vast net, they still moved forward. Quick on their feet, they passed along many rivers and mountains beneath them on their journey. The world inside the mad scorpion's body was more extensive than they had initially thought. Flying through the place took them 2 hours. Suddenly, they found a wooden wall standing right before them. Hundreds of sharp wooden sticks stood erect, serving as a defense for the city inside. It was a city that was built by those green-skinned creatures. Green-skinned guards surrounded the wooden wall, pacing back and forth for any strange movements and noises that might pose a threat. Some of them pulled the net, causing it to fly over the wall and land on a corner where a prison with iron fences stood. After unwrapping the large net where Zen and the others were trapped, the green-skinned creatures raised their spears towards him and his companions. One of them pointed a finger at the door of the prison and urged them to walk inside. They all looked at Yolanda. She blinked her eyes a few times, signaling that it was safe for them inside the prison. Taking the lead, they all walked to the door. The others followed closely behind her. Before Zen could even enter the prison, a green-skinned creature raised a spear to block his path. The creature also said some gibberish that Zen didn't understand. Looking down on his chest, Zen saw that the tip of the spear was pointed straight at the space ring on his chest. Greed was painted all over the green-skinned creature's face. Even though Zen didn't have a clue about what the creature was saying, he knew exactly what he wanted from him. It was the space ring on his chest. All of Zen's treasures and wealth were stored inside the space ring, including a large amount of heavenly essence. He even put the crab-shaped treasure which he used to resist the dark nether death light into that space ring. In addition, this space ring was given to him by Letitia. How could he give it up to a stranger that easily? A morose look glinted on all the warriors' faces. That crab-shaped treasure was essential to their safety and survival. Without it to protect them from the dark nether death light, there was no chance of them getting out safe and sound. The moment they left the mad scorpion's body, they could instantly be killed by the dark nether death light. Letting a stranger rob them of something so important was out of the picture. Don't you give it to him, Esther snapped, looking straight into Zen's eyes. All of them had put on their savage faces. If that green-skinned creature insisted on taking the space ring from Zen, they had no other choice but to fight. Even if they weren't able to utilize their life vitality at that moment, they were certain that their physical strength would suffice. The passivity that Zen was showing at that time annoyed the green-skinned creature beyond belief. He groaned in his unique language and then reached out his hand, trying to take the space ring by himself. Clenching his fists, Zen inhibited himself from punching him in the face. He knew quite well that he could have knocked that guard in just one move. To break the silence, Yolanda said softly, "Zen, just surrender your space ring and do as you're told." But, Zen scowled. It wasn't that he didn't trust Yolanda. Perhaps the good impression she left Zen was able to convince him that she was probably right. To obtain the inheritance, he must agree with her and give his space ring up. But the ring was of utmost importance to Zen. It devastated him to think that he was just going to let someone take it. "We'll get it back, trust me on this," Yolanda reassured him. "On top of that, those guards don't even know how to open it. Just trust me, please." Hearing Yolanda's words, Zen contemplated on whether or not he was going to hand over the space ring. Deep inside, he really wanted to fight back. However, he made a compromise and decided on it. He pulled the space ring off his neck and handed it to the greedy guard. The green-skinned creature mumbled something and a sly smile appeared on his face. After he angrily squinted at the guard, he turned his back and entered the prison. The intention of killing him was constantly growing in Zen's heart. Upon Zen entering the cell, the gates closed behind him with a loud bang. Turning to Yolanda, Zen glared, "No matter what your reason is behind all this, you have to give me an explanation right now." Everyone looked at Yolanda. They followed her advice all the way into that prison even if none of them wanted to be taken into captivity. Then, Yolanda replied cautiously, "The inheritance you are looking for is hidden in the world inside the mad scorpion's body." And then, Zen wasn't at all surprised by that, nor was he satisfied with Yolanda's answer. He wasn't a fool. Closing her eyes, she thought for a moment before continuing, "Just as you thought, the entire Dark Nether Cave was involved with the conflicts between two Supreme Lords. Actually, they were fighting for a fragment." Supreme Lords? Zen's eyes gleamed upon hearing so. It was because of the transcendent divine might inherited by the Red Dragon that Zen first heard of the Supreme Lord. A Supreme Lord called Lord Star created the stellar body. He must have mastered unimaginably formidable strength and power to make the transcendent divine might. Even in the upper world, there weren't many Supreme Lords. Yolanda nodded her head and answered, "Our human race can be divided into three major powers. The most influential one is the Lord of Original Sin who is controlling 4,000 large worlds. The Lord of Oracle is the second power and he's now leading 3,000 large worlds. The weakest power is the Lord of Thunder Punishment, with 2,000 large worlds under his control. If the powers of the human race are combined together, there would be a total of more than 10,000 worlds that they can use," Fabian stated, his eyes widened at that realization. Ascending to the upper world was every warrior's dream. Because the humans who lived in the Sea God continent were relatively weaker than the other races, Fabian and Jared initially thought that humans were also insignificant in the upper world. It never crossed their minds that humans could command more than 10,000 big worlds. This also shocked Zen. The Cyan Dragon once told him that humans had quite an influential existence in the upper world, but he never expected it to be this major. The entire genuine dragon race could only control one big world. The humans, however, had the ability to put more than 10,000 big worlds under their control. Undeniably, they were doing an outstanding job up there. "I didn't expect our race to hold that kind of power in the upper world," Jared said, his expression completely swelled with pride. The two ogres standing nearby, Malcolm and Rihan, remained quiet. Their hearts skipped a beat when they heard what Yolanda just said. Ogres had been boasting inside the Tower of Sin that they were the perfect race, while humans were feeble, weak and inferior. Humans were not a match to ogres when it came to talent, intelligence, strength and others. However, the excellence possessed by Zen suggested that they were wrong. For some reason, humans somehow succeeded in gaining a menacing existence in the upper world. At that particular moment, Lavender appeared. Smiling softly, she said, "Controlling such a number of worlds is really impressive, but it is definitely something humans should not boast about. They don't even dare to put up a fight against the Demon Knight." Glancing at Lavender, Yolanda shook her head, I admit that your race is strong, but you can't give birth to many babies. We couldn't surpass your race over the last 1,000 years. What about 100 years later? Will you have enough warriors from your race to fight against us by then? Despite the fact that the Demon Knight members were of absolute strength, they were quite weak in reproduction and enlarging their population. Back when the Demon Knight race had conquered a large number of worlds, they were not able to find enough people to be stationed there. Now, however, they controlled no more than 1,000 big worlds. In the upper world, a race's power isn't based solely on the number of worlds it has controlled. Am I right? Lavender argued. Yolanda shook her head again and replied, let's drop this. We should focus more on the conflicts between Lord of Original Sin and Lord of Oracle. I didn't make it clear to Zen before because I thought I shouldn't talk about these things before you. The truth was, Yolanda was talking to Lavender. Chapter 653, The Heavenly Fragment. The Demon Knight was unique from all other races due to the fact that they possessed soul statues which allowed them to easily communicate with the upper world. Thus, the members of the Demon Knight in the lower world were connected and united with their clansmen in the upper world. Other races were different. Although some could communicate with the upper world through secret methods, their links weren't as close. For example, those in the Purple Heart Sacred Place knew next to nothing about their peers in the upper world and were not aware of the important position the human race actually held up there. Among the three queens of the Demon Knight, Zen's sword spirit Lavender was the one in charge of killings. This was the primary reason why Yolanda hesitated. Her fears were not unfounded. The human race and the Demon Knight often competed with each other. The secret of the Dark Nether Cave was extremely important, and it was a dispute in the human race. Lavender let out a bell-like laugh after hearing Yolanda's words. You don't have to worry, she told her. I've already lost everything. Zen is my only hope now. Lavender had followed Zen with the last shred of her soul and hoped that by sticking to him, she'd one day be able to make a comeback. However, for the time being, she would serve as Zen's sword spirit. Zen stared hard at Yolanda. Tell me. Yolanda shook her head. My thoughts are somewhat naive. After all, the heavenly fragment will, at last, belong to Zen. Lavender whipped her head at Yolanda in surprise. What did you just say? Heavenly fragment. The Demon Knight Queen had thought that nothing else in the world could surprise her, but, lo and behold, Yolanda came and dropped this kind of bomb on her. The others, however, did not have such a strong reaction. Fabian, Jared, Malcolm, Rihan, Esther and the two top-level warlords of the Demon Knight were surprised at the Queen's reaction to Yolanda's words. Among them, Esther was the most surprised. She was well aware of Lavender's status and knew that she was a person who remained calm even in the face of the enormous Mad Scorpion. A Demon Knight Queen was no stranger to supreme legendary beasts, and while the Mad Scorpion was fearsome, it was only an extremely powerful vicious beast as a watchdog of. Yolanda raised a long, shapely eyebrow and looked at Lavender with threatening eyes. The heavenly fragment belongs to the human race. It has nothing to do with the Demon Knight. Lavender's expression calmed. You're afraid I'll get my hands on it? She smiled at Yolanda coldly. She then fixed her gaze on Zen. This is fate, she said. Zen will lead the world of chaos and has come all the way to the Sea God continent. I just didn't expect him to inherit a heavenly fragment. That's all. Zen frowned. Since the heavenly fragment is so important, why don't you take it for yourself? He asked Yolanda. Frankly speaking, Yolanda did not really need Zen to enter the Dark Nether Cave. She could have gone inside by herself and obtained whatever was hidden inside. The cursed land was built on the surface of the Sea God continent, while the Tower of Sin was used to suppress the Dark Nether Cave. The heavenly fragment was buried deep inside the cave. Furthermore, it was guarded by a beast from heck with the fragment itself hidden inside its body. Lavender smiled in realization. Because she can't take it. Zen frowned. Why? Yolanda visibly hesitated before replying. I don't have the jade butterfly, so I can't lure the heavenly immortal root here to open the Mad Scorpion's mouth, she admitted. Besides, I don't have a complete soul, so I can't really bear the fragment. Lavender had left a piece of her soul on the Killing Sword Mountain, while Yolanda's was split into 1,000,000 pieces and scattered all over the lower world for cultivation. Bearing the heavenly fragment required a complete soul that neither of them could provide. Then where's the fragment? Zen asked curiously. I learned the language of the green-skinned creatures through scouring Huey's mind. There was an extremely important piece of information I found, Yolanda replied. Those people had sealed the heavenly fragment away and given it to the green-skinned creatures, profit for safekeeping, turning it into their sacred treasure. I told them that I knew their prophet, so they brought us here. In other words, we are going to take away their sacred treasure. Zen asked. Yolanda nodded. Yep, that's exactly what we're gonna do. Then how do we leave this place? Esther chipped in. Her question was rather important. At that point, Esther, Fabian, and the rest of the party did not really care about what this heavenly fragment was. The conflict in the upper world had nothing to do with them, as far as they were concerned. If you find the sacred treasure, then you can leave, Yolanda replied. Her answer made everyone's shoulders slump. This small world had different rules. They couldn't activate their life vitality or forceful energy but could only build up strength and store energy. Each one of them found a corner in the prison to close their eyes and rest. If they wanted to take the green-skinned creatures, most sacred treasure, then they had better be prepared to fight for it. Here, even the time flow rate was completely different. There was no sun or moon in the sky, nor were there any stars, so nobody would be able to tell what time it was. They spent a few hours in boredom and idle silence. Not long after, a group of green-skinned creatures appeared outside their prison. The one at the lead had a withered ring on his head with 3 fist-sized skulls embedded on the edge. He also held a crooked walking stick and was surrounded by many other green-skinned creatures. Zen took one look at the man and whispered to Yolanda, "Is that their prophet?" Yolanda shook her head. "I don't know," she said before standing up and walking towards the green-skinned group. The man and Yolanda began talking intensively. After conversing for a while, the man ferociously poked the ground and turned around to leave. The other green-skinned creatures pointed their spears at Yolanda, Zen, and the rest of the party for a few seconds before leaving with their leader. Their actions made Zen confused. What was that for? Yolanda shrugged. The communication has failed. They plan to kill us tomorrow. Everyone was alerted with this revelation. Since the communications were in vain, they could only make their move to grab the treasure as soon as possible. It was impossible to estimate the cultivation of these green-skinned creatures. The rules they had grasped were in accordance to those of this small world. However, because it was built by the spiritual energy between heaven and earth that the mad scorpion absorbed, the small world was also a great constraint to them. Zen approached the edge of the bars and pointed at the green-skinned guard who had taken his space ring. The guard had been playing with the ring, trying to figure out how it worked. Seeing Zen pointing at him and asking him to go over to him, the green-skinned guard muttered a few words and walked towards the cell. As soon as he was at an arm's length, Zen extended his hand at lightning speed and grabbed his ring. He did not give the green-skinned guard any time to react and kick the bars that were holding them captive. Even without the aid of forceful energy, Zen's strength was outstanding as the bars crumbled and fell with one kick. Boom! There was a loud bang when the 5-feet-wide bars hit the floor and instantly crushed the green-skinned guard underneath. Zen walked over and stepped on his head, crushing his skull like a soft watermelon on a hot summer day. Zen lightly tapped his space ring and brought out a long spear. Without turning, he threw the spear towards Lavender, who was quick enough to catch it. At the same time, Zen took out his own broken flying knife. He buckled the ring at the end of the knife on his own thumb. With a slight wave of his hand, the knife shot forward into the air with a whoosh. Since he wouldn't be able to use his life vitality in this small world, this small flying knife had become an extremely useful weapon. Chapter 654, The Giant Stone. The green-skinned creatures were all headless as the flying knife butchered them in a dash, rotating around Zen. A green-skinned creature was pierced by Lavender's spear that was positioned to the distance. The group of green-skinned creatures were in distrust. They had underrated the warriors who could clearly be enforced on. The other green-skinned creatures that had left weren't too far away. When they heard a deafening bang from behind them, their faces expressed disbelief. This was least expected from them. Zen was under attack. The green-skinned creatures shot up in the sky to Zen with spears on their hands. They were full of themselves, with lots of vitality and fortitude. Their commander had waved his cane and positioned it at Zen and the others while drawing a long face. This contributed to the green-skinned creatures attacking Zen. Zen stomped on the ground after channeling up the strength of dragon scales to his feet. A taunting smile emerged on his face. A sparkling light was radiated from the flying knife in his hand that spun rapidly after firing up in the sky. Zen outsmarted the green-skinned fellows. He was one stride ahead of them. He excluded all of them before they drew out their spears to attack. They all fell down in a thud. The living things had lesser cultivation techniques. Their cultivation techniques were divergent from those of Zen and the others. Their strength was equal to that of the war fighters on the Sea God continent. The Great World had stronger regulations. This suggested that the small world rules were substandard. The war fighters had enormous strength in the Great World, leaving the green-skinned creatures to be less mighty. The green-skinned creatures captured Zen and the others. This was because of Yolanda deterring them from contending with the creatures. If they had battled those creatures, they would have unleashed their wrath on them. Zen's flying knife had already eliminated over 10 green-skinned creatures instantly. Zen shot towards the commander of the green-skinned creatures as his shadow flashed. The warrior expressed valor. This sight left the commander of the green-skinned creatures in astonishment. This was absurd. Zen and the others couldn't fly, and the green-skinned creatures' leader noticed that. He had to act quickly and take this vulnerability as his weapon. He waved the cane in his hand and promptly hauled himself up towards the sky. This initiated a distance between them. The sound of horns could be heard from the environs. The green-skinned creatures had set up this place as a bastion. A troop of the green-skinned creatures were present in it. The sound of the horn was a signal, so when they heard it, the entire garrison was filled with the soldiers as they embodied themselves for a battle. Zen crouched as he inclined his knees. The leader of the green-skinned creatures had ascended into the air. Zen shot skyward. He had attained strength after an incessant flow of the dragon scale's power surged out. Zen had collected more strength and his pace was way faster than the commander of the green-skinned creatures. Shock and disbelief engulfed the commander at the sight of Zen. Chanting, he raised his cane and wiggled it at Zen. The ensuing event had him dismayed. Rays of fiery clouds tumbled and quickly engulfed Zen. Zen was stronger and this meant that even the fire that enclosed the fire law was painless to Zen and wouldn't scorch him. There was a distance from the commander of the green-skinned creatures and Zen. Zen's strength to hop up had already been finished and his speed lessened, leading to the distance between the two. The commander continued sending down coats of fiery clouds as he swiveled his cane. He was now collected and relaxed. As he was in a calm motion, Zen's right hand darted out a white light. The flying knife drilled its way out of a fiery cloud and pierced through the chest of the commander of the green-skinned creatures. Zen stood on the ground firmly as he and the leader descended from the air. The impact after Zen attacked caused the leader to land badly as he fell down. Zen and his comrades had one particular plan. That was to retrieve the sacred object away and leave this small world. The green-skinned soldiers continuously gathered towards Zen, but they just scorned them. Yolanda in a small motion moved to the diverse side where the commander of the green-skinned creatures was. She tried to talk sense into him using their language and see if he gave in to his woes. Unfortunately, the commander was so aggressive and determined. He guffawed loudly like a cougar as he gripped his chest. What did he declare? Zen curiously asked. He has declined to reveal where we will locate the sacred object. He won't utter a word even if we get rid of him, Yolanda told Zen as she gawked at the commander. Let's end his life. Zen didn't let the leader take any chance to escape. He fulfilled his words by ending the leader's life using his flying knife that flashed immediately after his speech. The green-skinned soldiers were checking out at a glance while approaching after what befell on their leader. Fury boiling in them, some leading green-skinned creatures were even roaring loudly and demanded their commander to be handed over to them. Their reaction was self-explanatory to Zen and the rest, and Yolanda didn't need to translate. This was the only way they would be spared from their wrath and be allowed to go scot-free. The green-skinned creatures had seen what their leader had bumped into in the hand of Zen, which caused indignation and bewilderment among them. Zen had already seized the breath away of the green-skinned leader without thinking twice. The hundreds of green-skinned creatures at the front line all lifted their spears and ran towards Zen. This was the sole thing they would vindicate. Thousands of other green-skinned creatures were behind these several hundred green-skinned creatures. There was nobody holding back anymore. They had been constrained, and it was their turn to make an advance like enraged bees. This was a bloody, thirsty war. Esther, Fabian, and the rest had to battle back. The green-skinned creatures slumped down like grass being slashed after being massacred. The flying knife in Zen's hand drew out streaks of white light, like a dancing wheel of light, eliminating them instantly. Lavender's long spear thrust out and pierced through several green-skinned creatures' bodies. Lavender moved forward. Not even the green-skinned creatures restrained her from progressing. Zen's own substantial body and strength were his garrison in this small world. Lavender was so enormous, and their raids were so mighty that the green-skinned creatures in the small world were nothing in the eyes of Lavender and Zen. It seemed that Esther, Malcolm, and Fabian were much feeble. Zen's knife was so fast in motion. It eliminated all the green-skinned creatures. Despite charging up to the sky, they could not flee the wrath of the flying knife. The green-skinned creatures in midair were not left behind. They were eliminated in a blink. In the end, rows and rows of the green-skinned creatures were lying down dead. The figure of green-skinned creatures continued decreasing despite many in number. Zen's act of wiping out the green-skinned creatures snapped their attention. This was a losing battle. They commenced backing off, their tenacity and energy subdued. All their desire of winning went into thin air. All they left with was the clamor in misery and pain. "Run after them," Yolanda said expressionlessly. All the green-skinned soldiers started to run helter-skelter as their feeble legs could carry them out of the stronghold. They were withdrawing back into the darkness. Zen and the rest maintained an intense pace as they followed behind the scattering green-skinned creatures. Taking the sacred object by pressure was their sole opportunity at hand. Stealing had become a hard tussle after they faced the green-skinned creatures. There was no time left for them to maneuver the small world and analyze its content or how many races it had or how large or small it was. Their leading ambition was securing the sacred object. A grandiose city finally appeared in front of them. This was after sauntering about 100 miles as they trailed the green-skinned creatures. The sacred places on the sea god continent outshone this city. In contradiction to the stronghold they encountered initially, this was way much better and more powerful. The troops of the green-skinned creatures surged towards the city gate. Suddenly, a group of green-skinned creatures appeared above the city barrier. These green-skinned creatures scraped their teeth as they struggled to wrest something away. Quickly, Zen and the rest heard a loud bang. A giant stone rolled out from the city and was stuck at the city gate. This didn't trigger Zen at all and the rest. This was a walkover. Zen could easily jump over it with a single attempt despite the city wall was 100 feet tall. "By the look of things we are not the only enemies these green-skinned creatures have," Zen spoke. "That should be the least of our concern. Our main agenda is to get the object and get out of this place." Lavender was about to fly up with the long spear in her hand. She was the only one in a position to do so as others were not in a position to fly. "Wait," Zen stopped Lavender. "Grant me the honor to do it." Esther and the rest glanced at Zen who walked slowly towards the giant stone. Fabian suspiciously asked as he glanced behind his shoulder. "What for goodness sake is he trying to do?" His query was left unanswered. Zen slowly walked over to the stone. There were rather a few green-skinned creatures shooting arrows or even throwing long spears towards Zen at the top of city wall. This never inflicted any change on Zen and his motion in propelling forward. These storms were harmless considering his level. As Zen approached, he lifted his head to glance at the giant stone. The stone was over 200 feet tall, and it was like a medium-sized mountain which impeded the city gate. Zen breathed an exhale of relief, assembled his power of the dragon scales and struck a blow towards the giant stone. He had the urge of exploding in laughter but he held it back. He had to prove this race why he was much superior to them by showing off his capabilities. Chapter 655, Return. Zen's punch was infused with great power. After it hit the giant stone, a soft, muffled sound rang out. Pung! The sound seemingly came from inside the stone. It was not very loud, but everybody heard it clearly. Soon after, multiple cracks began to appear on the huge stone, making it look like an egg with cracks on its shell. As the cracks continued to appear on it, the giant stone began to collapse. A loud rumble accompanied that, and soon enough, the huge boulder was turned into dust. Then, a gust of wind blew past. Huff, huff, Zen was immediately engulfed by the surging dust. After what seemed like an eternity, the dust finally dissipated and settled down, and the huge stone in front of him was no more. The only thing left was dust. Shock appeared on the faces of many green-skinned creatures who were on top of the city wall. It was only then did the creatures understand that the warrior in front of them was not someone they could underestimate. Immediately, they started screaming out words that Zen could not comprehend. Even Malcolm could not hide the shock on his face. If it was him in Zen's position, he would have had to use the forceful energy before he could easily turn such a large stone into such fine dust. But then the rules of this small world were different. Everyone was forbidden to use their forceful energy and life vitality no matter what happened. So basically, Zen just relied on his physical body's force to do what he did. What kind of vicious beast is living inside Zen? Malcolm thought, as he felt a bead of sweat stream down his forehead. Yolanda understood Zen's intentions, so she turned to one of the green-skinned creatures on top of the city walls and said something. After the creature told her his reply, she turned to Zen and said, "Let's go inside." They then entered the city. Its style was very different from that of the human race's city. Green-skinned creatures on the streets, who were all holding long spears in their hands, started surrounding them, but no one dared attack them. It seemed that Zen's punch had left a deep impression on them. In their eyes, a powerful master like Zen would be virtually undefeatable. After a few minutes, the green-skinned creatures made way for Zen. 3 of them walked in front of Zen. The one in the lead wore a scarlet gold crown on his head, and held a brocade box in his hands. After some thought, Zen concluded that the one with the crown on his head was the land's emperor. This emperor signaled to Zen to come closer, and they talked. After their conversation, he raised the brocade box high up in the air. Yolanda, who was standing beside Zen, interpreted what the emperor said for him. At one point, she whispered to him, he said that they are willing to give us the sacred object but on one condition. What condition? Asked Zen. We have to help them kill a race in the north, Yolanda replied. I'm not interested in doing that, Zen said, shaking his head. He did not want to participate in any dispute between any races in this small world. There was no time he was willing to waste. Yolanda immediately told the emperor about Zen's decision. When he heard that, disappointment was evident on his face. Despite that, the emperor still handed the brocade box over to him. Perhaps he understood that this sacred object was not something that his race could keep, and even if Zen didn't go there to take it, the members from other races would take it away from them. Zen took the brocade box from the emperor's hands and gently lifted the lid of it. Immediately, what he discovered wasn't what he was expecting. It was a long and narrow crystal, but it looked incomplete. Despite that, it was emitting a magnificent aura. When Yolanda and Lavender saw the crystal, their eyes burned with passion. They knew about the existence of the heavenly fragment, but this was the very first time they had seen it. Slowly, Zen reached out to grab the fragment. The moment he touched it, it felt ice cold. Is this the heavenly fragment? It doesn't seem to be much different from any other ordinary crystal, he said flatly. However, all of a sudden, Zen heard an intense rumbling sound. Confused, he looked around to see if anyone else was hearing it, but it seemed that no one but him was able to perceive it. Once again, he looked at the heavenly fragment and it hit him, the sound was coming from it. By touching it, the aura from the entire universe seemed to rush into his head. This is. Zen's eyes widened. At that moment, it was as if the entire evolution of the universe that had happened over a period of 1 billion years flashed before his very eyes. All the secrets of the world were slowly being revealed to him, one by one. Bam! Yolanda raised her hand and knocked the heavenly fragment from Zen's hand onto the ground. Immediately, Zen snapped out of his trance, and started breathing heavily, as if he had just run a marathon. After he caught his breath, Yolanda said flatly, while your soul is indeed very, very powerful, it still can't handle this kind of object. Better be careful. What is the use of the heavenly fragment? Zen asked exasperatedly. With hesitation in her eyes, Yolanda looked at Zen and said, you will know when the time comes. I hope you make the right choice. At this, Lavender rolled her eyes and coldly smiled. With a smirk, she remarked, why don't you just say that you want Zen to stand by your side and on the side of Lord of Oracle? Yolanda belonged to the force of Lord of Oracle. Paying no attention to Lavender, Yolanda said faintly, Zen, you are fated to lead the great world of chaos. You have your own life and goals, and no matter which side you stand on, you will eventually take the correct path and live the life you are meant to live. Lavender once again rolled her eyes. She couldn't be bothered by whatever Yolanda was saying, and so she just turned her head to the side and stopped talking. The brocade box didn't only contain the heavenly fragment. It also held a small array plate. What is this? Zen asked. We'll need it when we leave the fog array, Yolanda replied. Hearing Yolanda's words, Esther and the others couldn't help but be surprised, and their eyes suddenly lit up. They couldn't care any less as to what the heavenly fragment was, but the array plate was extremely important to them as they would only be able to leave the fog array with its help. After obtaining those 2 items, they no longer wanted to stay where they were. Because of that, they immediately packed up, and left the green-skinned creatures' city, returning to their original path. How can we ever leave the mad scorpion's body? Esther asked, sounding curious and hopeless at the same time. The way we came in is the way we'd be able to get out, Yolanda answered flatly, confidently taking the lead. If we are able to escape the mad scorpion's interior world, then the creatures of this world should also be able to leave, right? Zen suddenly asked. It was a thought that had been sitting inside his head for quite a while. Yolanda laughed loudly and started shaking her head. The creatures, who are born inside the mad scorpion and follow this world's rules, would not be able to see the exit of this world. We, being outsiders, are being suppressed and rejected by the governing force of this world, and so we are presented with a chance to leave. Hearing this response, Zen couldn't help but be shocked. It was just as Zen had guessed before. If the entire universe was inside some giant beast, then the masters in that universe would have to follow the world's rules, whether it was how to use or how not to use their life vitality, their forceful energy, and all kinds of law power. Would this mean that even they, the masters of the world themselves, would not be able to perceive the exit of this whole world? To learn the answer to this question was tempting, but now was not the time for them to think about such things. Their mission was to leave the dark nether cave first, and that was what they were going to do. Time went by quickly. The fog in the entire dark nether cave started to gradually dissipate. In the blink of an eye, a month had already passed. All of the top-level warlords of the demon knight and the human race gathered on the top of the tower. They all looked upset and worried. Elder May waited by the exit of the Tower of Sin every day, but there was still no sign of Esther and the rest. It's already been a month. If Esther and the others still don't return, the dark nether deathlight will fill the entire dark nether cave again. A top-level warlord of the demon knight said. Once the dark nether deathlight's intensity reached its full force once again, the warriors in the dark nether cave would definitely die. It had been like that since the Tower of Sin opened its doors, and there had been no exceptions. Zen might be fine, a top-level human warlord muttered. In actuality, the person the warlords of the demon knight and the human race cared about the most was Zen, not Fabian or Esther. The reason why the demon knight members were worried about Zen's condition was because Lavender stayed closely with him. They did not want the queen of the demon knight to perish in the dark nether cave like this. As an extra level of precaution, Elder May had sent his race members back to the Heavenly Feather's sacred place to check the queen statue of the demon knight. As the statue was still glowing with a faint red light, which meant that Lavender was still alive and well, Zen might also still be alive. On the other hand, the humans were concerned about Zen for a very simple reason. Zen was currently the controller of the Tower of Sin. If he died, it would be easy for the ogres to come back to the tower. Even the Heavenly Feather's sacred place wouldn't have a good excuse to stop them from going back. If that time ever came, the seats at the top of the tower delegated to the human race would undoubtedly be taken away, and all the humans in the Tower of Sin would be expelled. It wouldn't matter which kind of warlord they were, weak, ordinary, or high-ranking, and every human being would be expelled from the Tower of Sin. It was something that humans would never want to see. They'd rather die than let that happen. Another dangerous repercussion of Zen's death, if that were to happen, was that Lavender, the queen of the demon knight, Zen's sword spirit, would also disappear, much like a wisp of smoke. If that happened, the Purple Heart sacred place would lose the protection of the Heavenly Feather sacred place. Now, if that happened and the Purple Heart sacred place was forced to fight against the two ogre sacred places, its only outcome would be the Purple Heart sacred place being totally destroyed by the ogres. And if that happened, the human race would be gone for good. Because of this, many human beings began blaming Zen for the uncertainty they were feeling. Despite understanding that without his appearance, the human race would still be at the brink of death and that he had brought their race temporary glory, they couldn't understand how it could all be taken away just like that. He gave the Purple Heart sacred place a glimmer of hope, but if that hope would be destroyed in less than a year, how could they be so willing to accept it? Apart from the humans and the demon knight, the other races were still maintaining a neutral attitude towards this whole debacle. However, the top-level warlords of the Night Group were secretly rejoicing. As the time of the closing of the entrance at the top of tower slowly approached, the probability of Zen's death in the dark nether cave also increased. The Night Group members continuously sent this information to the two ogre sacred places. Because of this, the top-level ogre warlords in the two ogre sacred places were already getting ready to re-enter the sacred places transmission array. They were also getting ready to head towards the Tower of Sin. And as soon as the entrance at top of the tower closed, they would begin to drive the human warriors out of the tower. Several days later, the red dot at the center of the dark nether cave suddenly became flared up, and became 1,000 times brighter than before. The weaker creatures that were lurking around started spreading out in all directions. Those weak monsters would not be able to resist the power of the dark nether deathlight and would only be able to move around the edges of the dark nether cave. Only the truly powerful monsters could live in the inner layer of the dark nether cave. The core area, on the other hand, was completely devoid of monsters. Except for the heavenly immortal root, none of the other monsters would be able to survive there. The moment someone stepped into the fog array, they would be slowly pulled towards the abyss. No creature could get close and resist the dark nether death light. Close. Bam! On Elder May's order, the entrance at the top of the Tower of Sin finally closed. Although there were news from the Heavenly Feather sacred place that Lavender's statue was still flashing with a faint red light, Elder May did not believe that Zen and his fellows would be able to return. After all, after the dark nether death light had already recovered, no one would be able to return from the dark nether cave any longer. Because of this, the majority of the warriors had concluded that Esther had also perished in the cave. Esther's death would surely be a great loss to the Demon Knight. After all, she was the strongest master among the seat owners. Without Esther to take charge of the situation, it would be difficult for the Demon Knight members to fight against Maurice of the Ogre. If Maurice returned to the Tower of Sin right now, the Demon Knight would be in a very sticky situation. Well, it's over. It's all over. A top-level human warlord screamed with a sullen face. Death is already knocking on our doors. Someone helps us. All top-level human warlords looked scared and disappointed. Among the humans, only Fabian and Jared were in charge of the overall situation. The other warriors who held seats in the tower simply couldn't be in charge of anything as they weren't that powerful and remarkable. Most of the top-level warlords didn't even have the qualifications to become seat owners before, and they only passed the time on the 14th floor of the Tower of Sin. How would the human race survive the ogres? What would happen to them now? In the Cursed Land, there was a transmission array and all sorts of majestic patterns were engraved around it. There were even sculptures of birds and beasts around it, which appeared extremely mighty and domineering. This was the ogres' transmission array. Since the ogres used to control the Tower of Sin, their transmission array proved to be a lot grander than those of the other races. With a flash of white light, a figure as large as a small mountain appeared. He was Maurice, the top-level warlord of the ogre. After leaving the Tower of Sin, many ogre top-level warlords chose to break through. Since they had accumulated plenty of lucky light after fighting for so many years, it wasn't difficult for them to break through and reach the War Sage level. However, even though it was easy for them to break the bottleneck and achieve a breakthrough, Maurice decided against it. The moment he was forced to leave the tower, he already planned a counterattack scheme. The moment Zen entered the dark nether cave, Malcolm and Rihan would be able to kill him. And because of that, Maurice prepared to return to the Tower of Sin the moment Zen entered the dark nether cave. He really wasn't in a hurry to break through. After all, he still wanted to become the ruler of the Tower of Sin. And with that, within the two ogre sacred places, Maurice suppressed his own cultivation. He was waiting for this day. Following Maurice, many top-level ogre warlords walked out of the transmission array, with malicious smiles on their faces. The time they had endured being driven out of the tower had been enough, and now that their revenge was nigh, they were feeling good. The fact that their race was chased out of the Tower of Sin was an unbearable humiliation to them, and today, the time to take what was theirs had come. The numerous top-level ogre warlords started to approach the Tower of Sin, and they all looked like hills on their way to tear the tower down. When they got close, the majority of the creatures inside the tower saw them, and all of their expressions changed. It was very clear that there was going to be a big commotion inside the Tower of Sin. These creatures had watched the ogres leave, and now, they would witness their return. At the door of the Tower of Sin, there were two giant guards. When they saw the group of top-level ogre warlords approaching them, fear became evident on their faces. Maurice looked down upon these giant war fighters and couldn't be bothered to talk to them. And with that, he just bellowed, "Open the door." The two giant guards quickly pulled open the door to the Tower of Sin. Soon after, all of the top-level ogre warlords entered the first floor of the tower. On the first floor of the Tower of Sin, many creatures were still fighting on the arena. However, the moment they saw the top-level ogre warlords coming, they were all startled and stopped. Zen has expelled the ogres already, right? How are they back here again? You really have very little information as to what happened to Zen. Zen died during his exploration of the Dark Nether Cave. Really, if that really happens, then wouldn't the human race be in trouble? It's Zen's fault. He had just overestimated himself. He was just a war general, but he really dared to explore the Dark Nether Cave. Not only did he die, he even caused the entire human race great trouble. Who knows, they might be extinct the next day. Murmurs arose in the tower as the creatures from many different races started discussing among themselves. There were many human war fighters on the first floor of the Tower of Sin and they were all scared and upset. Back then, the warriors of the Purple Heart Sacred Place had to become war generals before they could enter the Tower of Sin to practice. However, since Zen took control of the Tower of Sin, the status of the human race in the tower had greatly changed, and now, many human war fighters had got the chance to enter the Tower of Sin for cultivation without prior experience. Now that these war fighters were seeing the return of the ogres with their own eyes, they obviously knew what had happened. Soon enough, all of the humans in the Tower of Sin would probably be punished. Because of that, the human warriors wanted to secretly leave the Tower of Sin. However, their legs had already turned to jelly, and had no strength to escape. The top-level ogre warlords were still calm, but their bodies were already emitting a tyrannical aura as they entered the tower and as they went up the floors. Now that so many top-level warlords had entered the tower, they had attracted the attention of almost everyone. Very quickly, Maurice had finally climbed up to the 15th floor. He stepped into the hall at the top of the tower with his heavy metal boots. With a deep breath, he once again threateningly bellowed towards the small worlds in the depths, "All of you, the seats owners, come out. Get out of the small worlds. Come out right now." Many top-level ogre warlords who were staying behind Maurice also joined in. After a while, the doors to the small worlds opened one after another. Many seat owners came out. The night group members who held the seats came out first. After they got out, they stood beside Maurice. The night group was always controlled by and depended on the ogres, and even if the ogres were driven out of the Tower of Sin, it was a thing that would remain unchanged. After all, their eternal night sacred place was under the protection of the two ogre sacred places. The top-level human warlords and the top-level demon knight warlords were the last two to appear. Maurice took a glance at the top-level human warlords and suddenly let out a loud laughter. "Top-level human warlords. You were the creatures pestering the 14th floor in the past, right? What qualifications do you have to become a seat owner? Ha ha ha. Ha ha ha." All the top-level ogre warlords started to laugh. Even the top-level warlords of the night group started laughing with them. The top-level human warlords were livid. They were angry, but there was nothing they could do about it. Strength was the only thing that mattered in the Tower of Sin, and they were nothing after losing Zen. On the other hand, the members of the Demon Knight were relatively calm. After all, they had the powerful Heavenly Feather Sacred Place backing them up. Suddenly, they heard Elder May say coldly, "What do you want to do?" Chapter 656, The Situation. The laughter of the top-level ogre warlords died down. Maurice slowly walked forward, his aura becoming more and more domineering. As he walked, a small pit appeared in the ground in front of him but quickly closed up. "What do we want?" Maurice stared coldly at Elder May and laughed. "We want the Demon Knight to give up half of your seats. We want all of the humans in the Tower of Sin, both top-level warlords and war generals, to kill themselves right here." The faces of all the humans and the members of the Demon Knight darkened. "What? You want all of us humans to take our lives right here? That's too much. The ogres are too overbearing. They're puffed up with pride. The ogres have always been domineering. This time, the humans and the Demon Knight are going to suffer great misfortune." Ignoring all the comments, Maurice continued to stare coldly at Elder May. "Do you accept this offer?" In the past, the Demon Knight would have never accepted such an arbitrary proposal. Even now, although they had gained a few more seats, they were unwilling to give up half of their seats. During this trip to the Dark Nether Cave, the Demon Knight hadn't suffered a great loss. However, their most important members, Lavender and Esther, hadn't made it out of the cave. Elder May sneered at Maurice. "Maurice, do you really think that Esther is the only talent in the Demon Knight? Other than some of the humans, the 128 seat owners on top of the Tower of Sin were all top-level warlords. The top-level warlords all had varying amounts of strength, but the gaps between them weren't too great. The Demon Knight was much stronger than the ogres, so they weren't afraid of them. But Maurice was a problem." Maurice erupted into laughter. "Oh, what else do you have then? The Heavenly Feather Sacred Place. No matter how strong the Heavenly Feather Sacred Place is, they won't dare to start a war with our sacred places. Moreover, you should know very well that we have war sages in the Tower of Sin." Maurice actually didn't know whether Malcolm and Rihan were alive or dead. He hadn't had time to investigate the secret passage, nor had he received a response when he had tried to use the message rune to contact Malcolm. However, this wasn't a big deal. Even if Malcolm and Rihan had died, the ogres could still train more war sages, because until now, they were the only ones who knew about the secret passage. After the appearance of the two ogre war sages, Colin and Neil, many races had begun to suspect that the ogres had done something inside the dark nether cave. And their speculation was grounded. A long time ago, a few of the races had put forward various hypotheses and tried them all out. One of the hypotheses was that if warriors became war sages in the dark nether cave, they would not be affected by the cursed land. However, if warriors became war sages in the dark nether cave, they would die because of the dark nether deathlight in the cave instead. Once, a top-level warlord from the orc race had cultivated to be a war sage in the dark nether cave. He had even broken into a dangerous place in the outer layer of the cave with his improved strength and obtained quite a good opportunity. Unfortunately, when the dark nether deathlight once again spread throughout the entire cave, he'd had no choice but to return to the Tower of Sin and live there for a month before he died. It was a pity that none of the other races had found the secret passage at the bottom of the tower. Seeing that Elder May was silent, Maurice let out a hideous laugh. You can consider it, but I want to tell you that I'm not asking you for your opinion. I'm giving you an order. Maurice felt that he had no need to discuss this with the Demon Knight. If it weren't for the fact that he was afraid of the Heavenly Feather sacred place in Amber, he would have already massacred the humans and the Demon Knight today. After he finished speaking, Maurice turned to look at the rest of the seat owners. The expressions of the human top-level warlords were gloomy and afraid, as if they were lambs waiting to be slaughtered. Before Maurice could say something else, one of the human top-level warlords said, "We humans are willing to make a concession and let all our warriors out of the tower." This was a substantial concession. All the sacred places agreed that the Tower of Sin was extremely crucial to the development of a race. Cultivating in the Tower of Sin could save several hundred years of time. It was countless times faster than cultivating in the outside world. Exiting the Tower of Sin meant that the humans would voluntarily forfeit their future. The speed at which the Purple Heart sacred place was able to develop would definitely be slower than that of any other race. The decline of the entire human sacred place would be inevitable. A concession, Maurice sneered. Do you humans even qualify to make a concession? He hated the human race to the core. After all, the Demon Knight had only allied themselves with the human race. And they had interfered in matters that had nothing to do with them because of the sword spirit of that human boy, Zen. And just recently, all the ogres had been expelled from the Tower of Sin because of the human race, so Maurice wasn't going to let the human race off so easily. What else do you want then? We've already proposed to leave the tower voluntarily, a human top-level warlord said angrily. Maurice burst out into laughter. He suddenly took a step forward and crossed a distance of about 60 feet. His huge hand reached out at lightning speed and instantly grabbed the head of the human top-level warlord. What else do I want? Didn't I already say it? Bang! Sneering, Maurice tightened his grip around the human warlord's head. The human warlord didn't even have time to direct his life vitality before his head exploded like a watermelon. Then, Maurice threw the corpse of the human warlord like he was throwing some trash to the side and turned to look at the remaining humans. Many of the human top-level warlords had died in the dark nether cave. The remaining ones were weak, and most of them could only stay on the 14th floor. They didn't even have the strength to fight for the seats. How could they resist a powerful warrior like Maurice? Some of the human top-level warlords threw glances at the Demon Knight for help. However, the Demon Knight wasn't even able to protect themselves in this situation, so they couldn't help the humans. Elder May and the other members of the Demon Knight pretended not to see the human seat owner's pleading eyes. Maurice, you disregard the rules of the Tower of Sin. How could you kill someone here? A top-level human warlord said angrily, gritting his teeth. Maurice laughed coldly. Rules? Let me tell you, there have never been rules in the Tower of Sin. The law of the jungle is the only rule here. And from now on, I'm the ruler. With that, Maurice took another step forward and punched the human warlord who had spoken to him. Bang! The human warlord flew back and hit the wall like a sandbag, leaving streaks of blood everywhere. The other human top-level warlords felt their anger rise. The life vitality on their bodies started shimmering. As top-level warlords, they didn't want to sit still and wait for death anymore. Just as the humans were preparing to make their move, the bodies of the ogre top-level warlords behind Maurice also began to glow with forceful energy. A chaotic battle was about to break out. Determination flashed across the faces of the human top-level warlords. They knew very well that they were no match for Maurice, but they no longer had any choice. They had to kill the ogres, or they would be killed. Since you all refuse to take your own lives, my clansmen will kill you. A bloodthirsty expression appeared on Maurice's face. Today, he was determined to kill all of the humans in the Tower of Sin. When Elder May heard Maurice's words, she spoke to a nearby member through her life vitality. Lead all the humans on the 1st to the 14th floors to the Cursed Land. It was absolutely safe in the Cursed Land. This was the only thing Elder May could do to help the humans now. The warriors sent to the Tower of Sin were all the talents of various sacred places, and the weakest ones were human-level talents. The human warriors in the tower were the future hope of the Purple Heart sacred place. Killing them was equivalent to killing the future hope of the humans' sacred place. Elder May couldn't save the top-level warlords now. However, she could lead the other human war generals and fighters out of the Tower of Sin. Anyway, the Demon Knight and the humans were still in an alliance, so even if Zen was dead, Elder May would still have to help Lavender. The truth was, the humans in the Tower of Sin were much smarter than Elder May was giving them credit for. Other than a small number of human warriors who were cultivating in training rooms, many humans had already left the tower one after another. When Maurice had led his race all the way up to the top of the Tower of Sin at such an astonishing momentum, all the human warriors in the tower had noticed it and easily assessed the situation. Chapter 657. A rat-a-tat on the door. The Tower of Sin had not been peaceful this year. Many creatures in the Tower of Sin were discussing what to do. Some of the more timid creatures had already followed the human warriors out of the tower and entered the Cursed Land. If something bad happened, they didn't want to be caught in the middle of it. Inside the dark nether cave, Zen and his group were moving forward with an orange protective shield around them. As soon as they left the mad scorpion's body, Yolanda activated the pendant hanging on Zen's chest and pushed Malcolm and Rihan out of the protective shield. The moment the two ogres found themselves pushed out of the protective shield, they released their forceful energy to protect themselves against the dark nether death light. But the forceful energy lasted for less than 3 seconds before it disappeared. At such a close distance, even a warrior at the Soul Sea realm wouldn't be able to resist the dark nether death light that was being released from the mad scorpion's head. There was no way the two war sages could survive. Looking at Zen's shocked expression, Yolanda asked indifferently, "When were you planning to get rid of them?" "I wanted to know where they had been hiding first," Zen replied. "Malcolm wouldn't give you the chance. He would attack you the moment we leave the fog array. If he had managed to get your pendant, we would have been the ones to die." For once, Lavender agreed with Yolanda's words. Compared to Yolanda and Lavender, Zen wasn't experienced enough in dealing with these kinds of things. Or in other words, he wasn't ruthless enough. Yolanda and Lavender had much more experience when it came to these kinds of dangerous situations. When a group of warriors was exploring a place, only the most cold-hearted one would be able to survive and take all the treasures. The others would all be killed. By the time they left the mad scorpion's body, the fog in the core area had already started to dissipate. "The fog is starting to dissipate." Seeing that the fog had become extremely thin, Zen furrowed his brows in confusion. Yolanda blinked her eyes. "It should be because of the time flow rate. The time flow rate inside the mad scorpion's body is many times faster than that of our world. We might have been inside the mad scorpion's body for only a few days, but a much longer time has passed outside." Holy garbage. So the dark nether cave is closed now. That means that the humans in the Tower of Sin must be in a really bad situation now. Zen's face was gloomy. Esther looked worried too. If the ogres thought that Zen and the others were dead, it was very likely that they would have come back to the Tower of Sin. The members of the Demon Knight might not be in that much trouble, but the humans would be in great danger. "Let's hurry back to the Tower of Sin," Zen said, picking up his pace. It wasn't until they entered the thin fog that Zen noticed the extremely thin golden lines pulsing on the ground. The previous fog array was formed by these golden lines. As Yolanda spoke, she reached out a finger and injected her life vitality into the array plate on her hand, making it spin. As the array plate rotated, the golden lines started to change direction and break apart one by one. After the fog array lost its effect, everyone began to move toward the exit. Normally, once the dark nether death light became more intense, all the warriors would return to the Tower of Sin. However, Zen and the others had been moving forward under the full illumination of the dark nether death light for such a long time. This was something that no one else had even dared to attempt before. Fortunately, the monsters in the dark nether cave weren't able to block out the dark nether death light. Whenever there was a lot of dark nether death light, the monsters' activities were not that frequent. Zen and the group didn't encounter any monsters on their way from the core area to the inner area. Even when they passed through the Bloody Pass, the swallowing birds and azure wolves on both sides of the Bloody Pass were hiding in their nests. They didn't come out even though they could sense prey. From the looks of it, the monsters inside the dark nether cave also move only when the dark nether death light greatly weakens, Esther said while blinking her eyes. Zen nodded. Indeed. Suddenly, an exciting thought struck Esther. Along the way, she had already understood that the most important thing in the dark nether cave was not the belongings of the world lords, but the heavenly fragment. The other items weren't even worth mentioning in the same sentence as the heavenly fragment. But for most of the warriors on the sea god continent, the heavenly fragment was actually unimportant. It belonged to the upper world and had nothing to do with the lower world. Only a few of them would be lucky enough to go to the upper world. Furthermore, none of the warriors at the Soul Sea realm on the sea god continent had been able to go to the upper world. They could only watch as their lifespan approached its end until they died in the sacred places. So in their eyes, the most important thing in the dark nether cave was still the various treasures. Now that Zen had the pendant that could be used to resist the dark nether death light as well as the array plate that could be used to control the fog array, he would be able to freely enter and exit the dark nether cave in the future. Besides, when the dark nether death light was not blocked by the fog, all the monsters in the dark nether cave were also hiding in their nests. This meant that Zen could visit the dark nether cave without having to face much danger. In addition, with the protection shield of the pendant, he could even cultivate in the depths of the dark nether cave and make a breakthrough to become a war sage. The pendant hanging on Zen's chest only required a small amount of life vitality to operate. As long as he had enough life vitality crystals, he could cultivate in the dark nether cave for as long as he wanted to. Of course, Fabian and the others were also thinking the same thing. This could prove to be a huge advantage for both the demon knight and the human race. Previously, Zen had said that he might choose to leave the Tower of Sin and the Sea God continent. The warriors of the Purple Heart Sacred Place had been worried about this because once Zen was gone, the human race would lose control of the Tower of Sin again. Even if Zen chose to leave quietly, the other creatures would find out one day. If he was missing from the Tower of Sin for a long time, the ogres would definitely try to take control of the tower again. But now, with the two treasures that Zen had, a few of the humans could cultivate to become war sages and hide in the dark nether cave. Then, the human race would also be able to take firm control of the Tower of Sin without facing any problems. Fabian and Jared were thinking a step ahead of Esther. If Zen left these two treasures behind, then the Heavenly Feather Sacred Place would maintain an alliance with the Purple Heart Sacred Place even after he left because of the treasures. Seeing the fiery expressions on all their faces, Zen immediately knew what they were thinking about. With a slight smile, he said, "Don't worry. If I leave the Sea God continent, I will give these two treasures to Fabian for safekeeping. The humans will share them with the Demon Knight." When Fabian, Jared, and Esther heard Zen's words, their faces instantly lit up with joy. The value of this promise of Zen's was too great. Without the obstruction of the monsters, the group was able to return to the Tower of Sin very quickly. Soon, they arrived at the bottom of the tower. They all used their life vitality and stayed close to Zen as they flew upward. But when they arrived at the top of the Tower of Sin, their faces fell. "The exit is closed," Esther said, taking a glance at the door. This door was the exit of the Tower of Sin. Every time the dark nether death light filled the entire dark nether cave, the seat owners inside the Tower of Sin would close the door, with very few exceptions. Zen moved forward and pounded on the door with his fist. Bang, bang, bang. Meanwhile, Maurice, who was standing on the top floor of the tower, had just killed two human top-level warlords. The remaining human top-level warlords and the top-level warlords of the ogres were preparing to fight. At this moment, they all heard the sound of someone knocking on the door, leaving them stunned. How could there be someone knocking on the door after the dark nether death light had become intense? One of the top-level warlords of the human race shouted in joy, "Open the door." It must be Fabian and the others. No, it must be Zen. Another top-level warlord of the human race tried to rush up the stairs to open the door. But before he could climb the stairs, Maurice's fist smashed into his shoulder, sending him flying backward. The man spat out a mouthful of blood before losing consciousness because of his internal injuries. The top-level warlords of the ogres began to look troubled, and a trace of fear rose from the bottom of their hearts. Could it really be that brat again? Chapter 658. The Ogre's Plot. The air in the Tower of Sin hung heavily like a thick curtain. A nervous anticipation settled on the humans' faces as they waited with bated breath. The moment that the dark nether death light once again illuminated the entire dark nether cave, not a single one of the warriors inside would remain alive. Since the tower's appearance up to this day, there had never been a single exception. Not even the top-level warlords could withstand the dark nether death light. However, in the hearts of the humans, small embers of hope were quietly burning. Their torch was carried by one particular man. Zen was different. Before him, no one else had been able to rise up to the celestial position on the talent tablet. Furthermore, no one had been able to control the Tower of Sin, even more so use its power to fulfill his desires. From the very first day that he entered the Tower of Sin, Zen had been constantly creating miracles. Perhaps this time, he would show them another miracle. The top-level warlords of Demon Knight also shared this small hope. Only yesterday, news arrived from the Heavenly Feather Sacred Place. Lavender's statue still shone with the faintest light. It was dim, but it had not yet disappeared. Lavender was still alive. Based on this indication, it was very likely that Zen had returned. How he had managed to pass through the dark nether cave and avoid the dark nether death light remained a mystery to Elder May. Maurice's face was set in firm lines, almost ice-like in its coldness. He snorted and said aloud, "No one is allowed to open the door. Perhaps it is just some monster that has approached it by chance." What he had just said was not nonsense. Many years ago, an extremely powerful monster had run into the Tower of Sin, and the tower shook violently at the force of the impact. Although the walls separated the creatures inside the tower and the monster, the top-level warlords on the top floor had stood terrified to death, not to mention the warriors on the other floors. That collision had brought forth panic. Many warriors of the lower levels had fled from the tower, and only after many months had passed did they return. Fortunately, the monster was not able to destroy the tower. After some moments of continuous crashing, it silently left, as if in defeat. Right, it would be impossible for a mortal warrior to return. It must be a monster. A top-level warlord of the Night Group said in agreement. At these words, Elder May was the next person to speak up. "Not necessarily," she muttered. Pointing at her, Maurice ordered coldly, "Don't even think about opening the door." Elder May remained calm at the face of his anger and merely shrugged her shoulders. "I will not open the door. If it is Zen who returns, he will naturally come in. The door can't stop him," she said lightly. Zen had control over the Tower of Sin. Back when he was on the first floor, he had opened cracks in every floor and fell straight down to get to the 15th floor. A mere door would do nothing to stop him. Bang, 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 the quick and rhythmic pounding rang across the entire space. No monster could have been the cause of such a sound. One of the human warlords said in a low voice, "It's definitely Zen. How could a monster knock on the door like that?" "Let's wait and see," another warlord said. "When Zen makes it through, I want to see the looks on those arrogant ogres' faces." Amidst the silence, a 10-foot-long crack appeared in the tower's wall. The fracture appeared like a big mouth in the darkness, and revealed a male figure entering from the other side. The human warlords all felt thrilled as they watched. "Zen, it really is him. Zen is back. There's also Fabian and Jared. Esther has returned as well." The members of the Demon Knight all had joyous expressions on their faces. However, nothing would come close to the excitement that the human warlords felt. Their hearts thrummed in victory. Death was a foregone conclusion, forgotten amidst the cheers coming from all around. Zen had come at such a critical moment. Had he returned to the tower 5 minutes later, it was very likely that all the human warlords would have perished at the hands of the ogres. Even only this was reason enough for all the brimming excitement. Many of the human warlords had tears in the corners of their eyes as relief and exhilaration washed over them. Just earlier, they were standing between the thin border of life and death, but it seemed that fate had worked to their favor. Zen, Esther, Fabian, Jared, Yolanda, and the other 2 top-level warlords of the Demon Knight entered the crack one by one. As Zen entered, the 2 corpses on the floor first came into view. One was lying in the middle of the hall, while the other was against the wall. These were the bodies of human warlords. The floor under them was unsoiled. All blood that had flowed out from the corpses had gradually faded, absorbed by the Tower of Sin. One of them caught Zen's eyes. Familiar images came into his recollection as he looked at the corpse's lifeless face. In the dark nether cave, this man had released intense flames to stop the attacks of the swallowing birds. Apart from the two, another human warlord lay on the floor, his chest heaving with every breath. Deep injuries littered across his skin and his face had the pallor of a man at death's door. Zen's face darkened at the sight. Furious, he turned to look at Maurice. Didn't I tell you before? If I see the ogres appear in the Tower of Sin, I will kill them without mercy. Are you an idiot, Maurice? Or do you simply have poor memory? He said, his every word punctuated with anger. All the ogre warlords wore a dark expression on their faces. They had never conceived it possible that such a dramatic reversal would occur. As the reality of the situation dawned upon him, Maurice's face finally revealed panic. He didn't look like how he used to be at all. Nothing had ever shaken his composure. He knew from the start that Zen would definitely enter the dark nether cave. And once he had entered, his plan would commence. Zen would not be able to escape from the two war sages, Malcolm and Rihan. Then, without him in their way, the ogres could finally turn the tables. All he needed was for Zen to disappear. Maurice did not think of his last encounter with Zen as a loss. At first glance, it would seem as if he was driven out from the Tower of Sin. However, it was all a matter of planning. He was simply avoiding trouble. A strategic retreat, so to speak. As the time of the dark nether cave's opening approached, Maurice was counting the days. At long last, he was finally going to reap the rewards of his patience. His only worry was that Zen would choose not to enter the dark nether cave this year. After all, his cultivation was not as high enough. From the information he had obtained from the Knight group, Zen was a level 9 war general and could fight toe-to-toe against the top-level warlords on the 14th floor. But his cultivation was still too low to enter the dark nether cave. There was the possibility that he would choose to go to the dark nether cave after having become a warlord. But then again, Maurice was in no rush. At most, it would just take another year. There were plenty of things that could be done to refine his plan within this period. Malcolm and Rihan would be able to train for longer at the bottom of the Tower of Sin, increasing their chances of killing Zen. On the day of the cave's opening, news of Zen entering the dark nether cave reached Maurice. It was said that Zen entered without hesitation. Maurice almost couldn't contain his excitement in the days that followed. He spent hours deliberating if Malcolm and Rihan had killed him. Nothing brought him more satisfaction than envisioning Zen's pale, lifeless face. In the end, the dark nether cave closed, Zen did not return, and he also lost contact with Malcolm. Maurice knew that he had most likely sent Malcolm and Rihan to their deaths, but to him, it was a necessary sacrifice. In Maurice's eyes, it was well worth it. At the very least, Zen would have died in the dark nether cave. But at this point, with Zen standing before him in the flesh, Maurice realized that he had been completely wrong. Did Zen just have incredible luck? Even with such methods, Maurice had still failed to kill him. How did you come back? Maurice asked in a hoarse voice. Zen stood on top of the stairs and looked at him. Then, in a cold voice, he said, "Why should I tell you? Where's Malcolm? Where's Rihan?" Maurice asked again, his voice rising in volume. Esther then sneered. "Were those two your last hope? I would admit, sending 2 war sages after us was definitely a strong move. Unfortunately," her voice trailed off. "What? Where are they?" Maurice said. "Unfortunately, we killed them," Yolanda replied nonchalantly, her face devoid of even the slightest bit of emotion. No other races besides the ogres were aware of the matter. How did Malcolm and Rihan, 2 top-level warlords, enter the dark nether cave? And they even went after Zen. When had they become war sages? A flurry of silent questions rang inside the heads of all creatures present. The top-level warlords of the human race and demon knight stood in complete shock, their eyes wide open. The ogres are hiding secrets that we do not know. Colin and Neil were war sages, and yet they managed to stay in the Tower of Sin. One of the warlords said. This is no longer a crucial issue. What's more important is that Zen was able to survive despite the attacks of 2 war sages. What's more, his opponents were killed. Another one declared. A third voice rose and asked, "I wonder what else can stop Zen." Chapter 659, At the Foot of the Tower. Maurice let out a long sigh. He wasn't that old. According to the calendar of the Sea God continent, he was only about 60 years old, which was extremely young for a martial artist. However, with this sigh, he seemed to have become much older. Zen looked at Maurice and said coldly, "You haven't answered me yet. Do you have a bad memory?" Hearing Zen's words, many of the ogre top-level warlords revealed expressions of fear. Before, Zen had said that he would kill any ogre he saw in the Tower of Sin. Was he really going to fulfill this promise? Maurice hesitated for a moment before saying, "We'll leave now." "Leave?" As Zen pointed at the corpses on the ground, a cold smile appeared on his face. "You want to leave after killing top-level warlords of our human race?" Maurice snorted. "What else do you want? Even if you control the Tower of Sin, you can't afford to offend the Flaming Ogre's sacred place and the Dread Ogre's sacred place." Zen burst out into a fit of violent laughter, but there wasn't the slightest trace of a smile in his eyes, there was only the intent to kill. "The Flaming Ogre's sacred place and the Dread Ogre's sacred place. Do you think I'm afraid of them?" Just as Zen was about to make his move, Esther stopped him. "Zen, how about we let them go? The top-level warlords in front of them could be considered the backbone of the ogres. They would become war sages and even Soul Sea Realm masters in the future. If Zen killed them all, it would be a heavy blow to their sacred places. Moreover, this was tantamount to offending the ogres." Esther took the overall situation into consideration. If Zen really forced the ogres in the Flaming Ogre's sacred place and the Dread Ogre's sacred place into a corner, then there was a high chance that the Purple Heart's sacred place of the humans would be razed to the ground. "I know what you're thinking," Zen said to Esther. "But today, all the ogres have to die." After he finished speaking, he jumped down from the stairs and sped toward Maurice. "You dare!" An ogre top-level warlord could no longer hold back and rushed toward Zen. As he charged forward, the forceful energy within his body erupted. Zen waved his finger gently, and an invisible force instantly enveloped his opponent. Then, everyone heard the sound of cloth tearing. Ah! The ogre top-level warlord was soon torn into pieces, his brown blood splashing all over the ground. "I'll offer your bodies to the Tower of Sin as sacrifices." Zen's face was ferocious and his entire body was brimming with a strong malicious aura, as if he was a god of death that had descended into the world. As Maurice realized that Zen had really meant his words, his expression changed. He turned to his clansmen. "Retreat. Leave the Tower of Sin." Knowing they were in danger, many of the ogre top-level warlords rushed at lightning speed to the rear where there was a staircase to the 14th floor. In the blink of an eye, they had arrived at the entrance of the staircase. However, Zen wasn't going to let them go just like that. A crack appeared on the ceiling above him and he jumped into it, blocking the entrance to the 14th floor. He wasn't going to let a single one of these ogres escape. The ogre top-level warlords had just climbed up to the 14th floor from the top of the tower and seen Zen blocking their way at the entrance. They looked at him in fear as if he was a humanoid devil. "Let's fight him. After all, he's just a war general. Kill him. No matter what, we will die." Several ogre top-level warlords roared. Their towering bodies looked like small mountains as they swarmed forward. Once again, Zen gently lifted his finger, tearing the ogres into pieces with an invisible force. Their corpses were scattered all over the steps of the Tower of Sin, and Zen confidently walked up those blood-stained steps. "Devil. He's a devil." Realizing that they were far from being a match for Zen, the ogre top-level warlords desperately tried to retreat, running back toward the top of the tower. However, Zen didn't give them a chance to leave. He chased after them and activated the power of the weapon spirit inside the Tower of Sin, swiftly strangling all the top-level warlords. "Ah, no!" The screams of all the top-level warlords rang out, and the corpses splattered everywhere. It was as if the steps had turned into a terrifying scene of carnage. Most of the warlords on the 14th floor were used to bloody scenes, but after they witnessed this scene, their faces went pale with shock. In the past, they'd envied the ogres very much and even regretted not being ogres. However, they couldn't do anything to change their identities. All they could do was resenting the fact that their races weren't strong enough. But now, for the first time, they felt glad that they weren't ogres, otherwise, they would have met a cruel end just like these ogres. Taking one step at a time, Zen slowly made his way to the top of the tower where Maurice had disappeared. Has he entered one of the small worlds? Zen swept the area with his gaze but he couldn't find Maurice. There were 128 small worlds at the top of the tower, so Zen wondered whether Maurice had escaped into one of them. Yolanda shook her head and pointed to the top of the stairs. "Maurice rushed out of there." "What? He rushed out of there?" A trace of surprise flashed across Zen's face. Isn't he afraid that the dark nether death light will directly shoot him to death? Even so, Zen didn't give up on the chase. Since the ogres could make breakthroughs in the Tower of Sin and become war sages, their secret must be hidden at the bottom of the tower. As for what the secret was, Zen had no idea, but he knew that Maurice wouldn't kill himself just like that. Thus, Zen channeled his life vitality into the pendant on his chest, and an orange protective barrier appeared around him. Then, he walked up the stairs and entered the dark nether cave. Yolanda, Esther, Fabian, and Jared all followed him. Lavender also appeared beside Zen. Zen was invincible in the Tower of Sin, but outside the tower, it wouldn't be easy for him to fight Maurice alone. If Maurice really had a way to protect himself from death, Zen would be in trouble. Outside of the top of the tower, a thick dark nether death light spread out. This fatal light could shatter the life vitality that protected warriors in just a few seconds before killing them all. After reaching the top of the tower, Zen flew around with a trace of suspicion on his face. He still hadn't found any trace of Maurice. But Maurice couldn't be too far away. He wouldn't be able to resist the effect of the dark nether death light at all. With that thought, Zen closed his eyes and gradually released his senses to slowly investigate his surroundings. After a few moments, he sneered. He took out a top-grade sacred long sword from his space ring and slowly approached in a certain direction. Fabian, Esther, and the others exchanged glances. Had Zen really discovered something? All of a sudden, a burly figure appeared from the side of the Tower of Sin. Maurice had been hiding there. Zen, since you want to die, die with me. Maurice roared. There was a dazzling flash of light above his head. Maurice had unexpectedly chosen to burn his spiritual altars. A martial artist that cultivated the life vitality system could cause his belly to explode and fight to the death with his opponent. A body refiner, on the other hand, could burn his own spiritual altars. If he chose to do so, the power of the forceful energy released would be appalling. However, this choice was irreversible. Once the spiritual altar was burned, it couldn't be rebuilt. As a body refiner, Maurice had already had 3 spiritual altars. The power released by the burning of the spiritual altars was truly great. Although Zen continued to look indifferent, Esther and the rest all had a drastic change in expression. Attack him! Esther, Fabian, Jared, Yolanda, and Lavender launched an attack at the same time. Esther's strength alone was on par with Maurice's, but since Maurice had chosen to burn his spiritual altars, his aura and strength had increased exponentially. He was now so powerful that he could single-handedly resist all of their attacks. Don't kid yourselves. You can't resist me. As Maurice roared, a dense stream of fist radiance shot out from his hand. It was as if no one could stop him. Chapter 660, The Purge. As the crowd looked at Maurice's ferocious expression, a single thought flashed through their minds: this guy was crazy. Facing the frenzied Maurice, Esther and the others kept retreating. So did Zen. In this way, Maurice was always under the dark nether death light. Even though this area belonged to the periphery of the dark nether cave and was quite far away from the mad scorpion, the power of the dark nether death light was still far from what a top-level warlord could resist. Moreover, in this crazy state, Maurice didn't even activate his forceful energy to protect himself. He only wanted to fight Zen to death. The 3 spiritual altars in his body were already burning, so why would he care about his life? Maurice had no plan to live on at all. Zen retreated at lightning speed, and everyone followed closely behind him. As for Maurice, the moment he rushed out from his hiding place, his skin began to burn under the dark nether death light. As he sprinted forward, the skin on his body melted away, followed by his flesh and blood. His originally tall and sturdy figure gradually shrank, and his rough and brutal face melted away to reveal the skull underneath, making him look like a skeleton. Ah! As Maurice howled in pain, his attacks became more and more ferocious, and he managed to charge into the orange light barrier. At this moment, Zen's eyes flashed, and he waved his long sword. No move. Just because the name of the move was no move, didn't mean that there wasn't a move. This move was completely controlled by Zen, and he could freely bring it into full play. His sword attack contained a terrifying power. A raging sword intent roared and collided head-on with Maurice's fist light. Cluck, cluck, cluck. Maurice's body was almost burned to ashes by the dark nether death light. The flesh on his hands had completely disappeared, leaving only pitch-black bones behind. When his fist collided with Zen's sword light, his bones began to crack and fall away. Die! Zen shouted. He didn't cease his attack at all. The power of the dragon scales within his body erupted, forcing Maurice out of the light barrier. Maurice raised his head and fell backward. His eyes were filled with a sense of helplessness. He had lost the battle. Just like a snowman under the scorching sun, he turned into a pile of bones that fell into the dark nether cave. Standing within the orange light barrier, Zen looked down in surprise. It had to be said that the ogres were indeed a battle race, and Maurice's plan had been very meticulous. Unfortunately, he had underestimated the complexity of the dark nether cave as well as Zen's strength. So that's how it is, Esther said as she stared at the side of the Tower of Sin. It seems that the ogres found the secret tunnel here a long time ago. The others slowly moved closer. Neil and Colin had hidden here to cultivate. Malcolm and Rihan must have hidden here as well, Fabian said. Zen smiled faintly. You can also arrange for people to hide here. Either by using the crab-like pendant on Zen's chest or by hiding in this secret passageway, the humans and the Demon Knight could send more top-level warlords into the Dark Nether Cave. However, breaking through inside the Dark Nether Cave would come at a price. Warriors who broke through inside the Dark Nether Cave would never be able to leave it. They would only be able to stay in the Tower of Sin for a short period of time before returning to the Dark Nether Cave, that was, unless they were able to find a new path or loophole like this one in the future. Of course, stumbling upon such a discovery would come at a great price. Some people were destined to die for the sake of their entire race. Zen and the others returned to the top of the Tower of Sin. The moment they entered, they saw several top-level warlords of the Knight group being controlled by the Demon Knight and the humans. Zen's gaze swept over the top-level warlords of the Knight group. It's about time to take out the Knight group. 6 months ago when Zen had banished the ogres, he had been lenient enough not to banish the Knight group. During his journey to the Dark Nether Cave, Malcolm had found him partly because of the Knight group's help. Moreover, when the ogres had returned to the Tower of Sin, the Knight group had stood firmly on their side. So now, they had to be taken out of the picture as well. The next moment, there was another purge in the Tower of Sin. All of the Knight group warriors were banished. The news that Zen had killed all the ogre top-level warlords swept through the entire Sea God continent like a storm. The Heavenly Feather Sacred Place and the Purple Heart Sacred Place once again entered a state of alert in case the ogres attacked all of a sudden. After all, the extermination of all the ogre top-level warlords was a fatal blow to the Flaming Ogre Sacred Place and the Dread Ogre Sacred Place. Those top-level warlords had been almost all the talents of their race. The future powerhouses of the ogres were supposed to have been chosen from them. This matter would definitely anger the Flaming Ogre Sacred Place and the Dread Ogre Sacred Place, maybe even enough to fight back with all their might. However, the two sacred places eventually chose to be silent. After losing the Tower of Sin, they had lost their courage to start a war. If they were to fight against the Demon Knight and the humans, they would be able to make them pay a considerable price, but the ogres themselves wouldn't be able to recover after suffering more losses. After all, the Demon Knight and the humans had firm control of the Tower of Sin. As long as they weren't exterminated, they would be able to recover quickly. However, the ogres would never have such a chance. Compromise was the only way for the ogres to survive. Having lost the Tower of Sin, the decline of their race was destined to happen sooner or later. The Knight group, which was a vassal force of the ogres, also faced the same situation. They didn't even have the chance to resist. The Knight group was an expert in hiding and assassination, but at most, they could only organize a few innocuous assassinations. When it came to war, they couldn't even defeat the Purple Heart Sacred Place. Zen continued to train in the Tower of Sin, occasionally entering the Cursed Land to communicate with the stars. As a transcendent divine might, Stellar Body was undoubtedly powerful, but the biggest problem was drawing out the power of the stars. The more stars Zen could draw out power from, the more powerful Stellar Body would be. However, it was extremely difficult to draw out the power of a star. So when Zen successfully communicated with a star and cultivated Stellar Body for the first time, Red Dragon was immensely impressed. However, Zen failed continuously in his next few attempts to communicate with the stars. It was normal for warriors to fail when they cultivated, so he didn't take it to heart. Since the first day he had stepped onto the martial arts path, he had clearly understood that this road was destined to be difficult. Even if he was someone with great luck, it would be impossible for him to succeed easily. He still needed to work hard. He had known that as long as he tried his best, he wouldn't regret anything even if he couldn't become the strongest warrior one day. 3 months later, on the Heavenly Eagle Prairie, there were a few white clouds in the clear blue sky. The breeze blew occasionally. The sun was shining, but the weather was just warm enough for people to lie leisurely on the grass. Hundreds of tents had been erected on the prairie. A few strong and sturdy men were sitting on big horses, driving the sheep forward with half of their shoulders bare. The ogre race had been drastically weakening ever since their surrender. Originally, the heavenly eagle prairie had been divided into 3 parts with the ogres, the demon knight, and the humans occupying a third of the area each. But now, the entire heavenly eagle prairie had become a true pasture for the humans alone. The surrounding herdsmen also slowly began to gather and form a small nomadic clan. There were warriors in this nomadic clan. If this nomadic clan was evaluated, it would be equivalent to a second-grade sect. All of a sudden, dozens of beams of light shot through the sky. The sheep began to flee in all directions as they felt the pressure from the sky. The herdsmen began to shout, trying to gather the sheep. A girl on the pasture raised her head to the sky, widening her big black eyes. She wasn't afraid of the dazzling sunlight. She stared at it for a long time before excitement suddenly flooded her face. She turned around and ran to a nearby tent. "Father, Craig, it's the true God. The true God is here." Hearing the little girl's shout, a young man suddenly jumped out of the tent, his face filled with excitement as well. In 2 years, the little boy had grown into a tall and handsome young man. "The true God, where is he?" Craig asked excitedly.